will show up. But in the meantime, I think we should get started. So I'll formally call to order the Wednesday, November 17th, 2021 meeting of the City of Falls Church Planning Commission to order. And first, let's call the roll, Ms. Baseman.
Chair Krasner,
I'm here.
Mr. Stevens,
Here.
Ms. Teets. Mr. Princess is going to be late. Ms. Weiss.
Here.
Ms. Comont.
Here.
And Mr. Hyra will also be late.
All right, so we have a quorum. The other members, I believe at least some of them will show up for sure. So I know we have a number of things on the agenda tonight, but we'll hopefully they'll be with us soon. Okay, first I will read the required announcement for virtual meetings. The meeting for which this agenda has been posted and will be held will be held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of the Planning Commission will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and all members of the public are welcome to view the meeting at our website, which is www.fallschurchva.gov/PC, and as well on Falls Church City Television, which you can view on Cox Channel 11, RCN Channel 2, and Verizon Channel 35. For public participation tonight, and this is a change from other meetings, but in order to encourage public participation for the public hearings tonight, the comments are, of course, accepted virtually. Anyone who signs up to speak will speak via the meeting video platform. And in order to speak, you can do that tonight during the meeting. So to speak on a public hearing item or provide general comment, you'll need to complete a speaker form, which you can do at our website, which is www.fallschurchva.gov/PC. You could have done it beforehand, or you can do it, as I said, during the meeting tonight. Following the submission of the form, you'll receive an email with instructions on how to join this meeting. Written public comments are also accepted. We've received some already, but if there are other comments that want to be provided tonight, you can do that at our website, which is or our email address, which is PLAN, PLAN, @fallschurchva.gov. And if you do that, up until, for whatever item it is that you're providing comment, if you do that while the public portion of the meeting is still open, then our staff will provide those to us. And they'll be sent and summarized here at the meeting. So again, we're making some changes tonight since we can't be in person, although hopefully in the near future we will be, but for the time being, for anyone who's watching and wants to participate, either to speak or provide written comments, you can do so tonight as I just described. Okay, so with that out of the way, well, next we'll go to the adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, if I could sort of interrupt for a moment on the, we have a technical glitch on the speaker form sign up. The speaker sign up form, the web form is not working, but if anybody emails plan@fallschurchva.gov, and that same email address is what's showing on the non-functioning sign up slip. But if anybody emails that, we can also pick that up and get them the instructions for joining the meeting tonight.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. So it sounds like anybody who wants to participate, don't use the online form. Just email to plan@fallschurchva.gov, and that email address is being monitored in real time by our staff, and they'll respond back with instructions on how to participate. Okay, so the adoption of tonight's agenda, I think this agenda is laid out pretty logically, given the items we need to discuss tonight and the action items specifically. So unless there's any suggestions or comments from commissioners, I'll look for a motion to adopt the agenda as it's published.
Move to adopt the agenda for 11/17/2021.
Great. Yep, thank you, Mr. Stevens. And is that Ms. Teets? Good, you've joined us. Great.
Yes.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, then a roll call vote.
Chair Krosner.
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
Ms. Teets.
Yes.
Ms. Weiss.
Yes.
Ms. Comont. Yes. Thank you.
Great, excellent. All right, so we'll proceed as printed. We have no speakers for the speaker series tonight. Any petitions received for items that are not on the agenda? Ms. Bazemore?
No.
Okay, I know we received several pieces of correspondence for items that are on the agenda, and we'll discuss those in due course. Okay, so that brings us to our action items. Tonight we do have 3 public hearings scheduled, and we're going to take them in order. So 6A, our first item, is a public hearing and action on the naming of the streets in the West Falls development. And we had a work session on this last time to introduce this item. So why don't we start off with, I guess, throw it over to staff to summarize the requested action that's before us tonight.
Sure, I'll do a brief introduction just on process and then turn it over to Carly Aubrey, the lead planner on this one. Ms. Bazemore, if you could jump down to line 88, the timing section. Chair, as you said, this item is before you all for public hearing and action tonight. This is your recommendation on the naming of names in the West Falls Church project area. As you can see, this was previously referred up by council. As you mentioned, you've held a previous planning commission work session on this earlier this month, November 3rd. And you're scheduled tonight to make a recommendation on it, and then city council is expected to take final action on it in one of their December meetings. So that's all I want to say in terms of introducing the item, and then I'll turn it over to Carly Aubrey, as I said, our lead planner on this one. Carly?
Good evening, commissioners. I'll just provide a quick update since the work session a couple weeks ago, and then I'll turn it over. We have Matt Steenhoek with FCGP here, and they'll present. They have a updated map with some They have a update you all, but also from a couple of the other boards and commissions. So we went to the Rec and Parks Board and got input from them. They were generally supportive. Did have a recommendation on the Arbor Way streets. And then I think most exciting is that we just heard today that West Falls Boulevard is acceptable from Fairfax County for the whole stretch leading up to the metro. So that's kind of a big accomplishment. Kind of a small thing, but big deal. So at this point, we do have a recommendation or a motion for you all that's based on your feedback. But at this point, I'll turn it over to Matt to walk through the names, and then hope to get feedback from you all on those new names, and then finalize a motion for council. So, Matt. And then Emily, if you could pull up that PDF I sent you earlier this afternoon. Yep, thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Carly. I was just going to ask to have this pulled up, so that works great. Good evening, Commission. Thank you for your time and for all the feedback when we presented this to you a couple of weeks back. There was a lot of really constructive ideas that were out there, and I think we tried our best to take those into consideration while also weighing the other feedback that we've gotten from the other boards and commissions, as well as the very good reception that we had on the original plan from the council itself. So as you'll recall, we had a scheme that was primarily based on the tree names or the reference to the arbor, West Falls Boulevard being a placemaking element that was sort of a very critical element on that central spine, and then Cardinal Lane as the state bird, and also just a cardinal direction sort of reference there. Let's go to the next page to show you where we've made modifications, and I'll just walk around these counterclockwise for you. So starting with Meridian Street, guys, one moment, I'm sorry. I apologize. It's bedtime antics with my children screaming in the background. Magnolia Street was the blue line crossing the site going there. one of the recommendations that came from the mayor was to consider changing that to Meridian. We discussed that with the school board. They were supportive of that. So that's a recommended change that we have there, to obviously, pay deference to the naming of the school. And then you also do have a little bit of a relationship between Meridian and Cardinal, again, from that directionality element. So we think that's a positive change. I think Magnolia was also one of those names that people had a little bit of a reaction to, feeling that it was, a little predictable or contrived. So that one we're recommending adjusting. Cardinal Lane, below that, we had previously shown Arbor Way continuing through, broken up by Block B3, and there was concern that that might cause confusion for folks. So the recommendation now is to have Cardinal at a sort of dogleg around the edge of B1 and be Cardinal on both sides of that building. So keeping that name, but sort of taking the approach of allowing it to be one continuous street instead of segmented with Arbor Way in between. Ms. Aubrey mentioned West Falls Boulevard and the good news that we got back from the Fairfax County officials earlier today, that would be accepted and that their fire department and everyone was comfortable there. So we're very pleased about that can be the name of the street that extends all the way from Route 7 back to the metro. So that's good, good news. And then the last item is what we're proposing for Redbud Alley. I think a couple of the things that we heard from this commission, one was a concern about mulberries, that the white ones, I believe, are invasive. Maybe I have it backwards, but to not necessarily want to name a street after that. And also the idea that lanes should be a certain type of street and that this is very much an alley. So we tried to reflect the suffix to more appropriately show what kind of street it is, and get rid of the mulberry to go with redbud. And we heard earlier in forestry actually that they're planting quite a few redbuds around the city of Falls Church. So that also hopefully sort of ties in and should work. So those are recommended changes, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll start off, although normally I don't start off, but something very obvious. We already have a Meridian Street, in town, and I wonder if that segment of Meridian Street, there is a Meridian Street that's over, on the very edge of, the city near the border with Arlington and Fairfax. So is that, I don't know, staff, did that come up? Did people forget about the Meridian Street that we already have? And is that a problem? I know there can be disjointed segments of streets, but I don't know, that might be confusing. I don't know if that came up. Ms. Aubrey, did that come up at all?
Well, yeah, we'll look into that. It was a recent change, so I'll double check with our GIS person.
I mean, I know it exists. I know we have a Meridian Street. That I'm not questioning. The question is more, is that would that be a disqualifying flaw to have another section of Meridian Street that's completely disjointed from, has no other relation to the existing Meridian Street? I don't know. That's I know we talked about that a little bit in general to try to avoid confusion with like street names that are even outside of like the Falls Church city or the 22046 zip code, but this one's right in town here already, so that might be a problem. Other than that, I think I like Redbud Alley, and I like, the others. I think I was okay with anyway, but that one just might be. Otherwise, I would like that name here; it would be very appropriate. But the fact that we already have one, which I remember was brought up during the naming of the high school, is there was some discussion about why they chose that name. So anyhow, let's see what my other commissioners have to say. I'll throw. I think I forgot. I didn't see whose hand went up first. I'll just start with Ms. Coma.
I had the same comment as you. Our friends live on Meridian Street in Falls Church City, so I think they would be surprised if there was another new Meridian Street over by the high school. curious if you had any other ideas for that street. I agree that it's appropriate. I mean, it feeds directly to the high school. So I don't know if there's something else related to the high school that we could use there, or if you had other alternatives, when you were kind of rethinking.
I'll say that we didn't run down a lot of other alternative paths after the mayor recommended and the school board was in favor. We didn't explore a lot of other paths, but it's also due to the fact that I did not realize there was another Meridian Street. So
yeah, in their defense, it's not a very big street. It's small, so it's a portion of it, but it's there.
Fair.
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll explore that, and whether it's needs to be a Meridian something else, or if Meridian just doesn't work, and come up with an alternate approach.
Sounds good.
Okay, Mr. Stevens, go ahead.
Yeah, just to pile on here, I see that the Meridian Street, it comes off of Lincoln Avenue and proceeds west across Northwest Street and all the way through there. So there may be a piece of that that's in Arlington, but looks like we definitely have some in the city as well.
Oh yeah, no, most of it's in the city. There's a section that continues into Fairfax, but there's at least, I don't know, a dozen or so homes on there that are in the city. Actually, since we're talking about geographical oddities, when it's in Arlington, it becomes North Arizona Street, but that's a whole another issue. Then it turns into Meridian Street again, but that's another issue. Anyway, so yeah, hopefully, I have to believe that the mayor and others know that there's a Meridian Street, so maybe there's some issue as far as, I don't know, maybe it would be okay to have another name like that, but I think it would just be so confusing. I mean, we have obviously north and south versions of streets, and they don't always line up, and we certainly have things like that. But in this case, they're really nowhere near each other, and would have no other relationship at all. So I can see confusion for an address on Meridian Street. I have a feeling you might find people looking for something on in the development there and winding up like on the little residential Meridian Street. And that might also be a potential problem. So, Ms. Weiss, why don't you go ahead?
We still like Magnolia, so
Okay.
My office area is being invaded. Speaking of bedtime antics, so I understand. I'm just we do have another street. It's unfortunate because I do like it very much. I like Meridian Street for here. I understand why everybody is supportive of it because it makes a lot of sense, but there's a practical challenge with it, I think. I am mindful that we do have another school right over there. So I don't know if that would provide inspiration for other names. We have Mustang Alley. Could we have Husky Street? I mean, it's, Huskies aren't from Virginia, but that is another option that would be like almost literally parallel to Mustang Alley. So maybe we can make a connection with Mary Ellen Henderson and the Huskies. The other comment I had is I really like Redbud. I think that's terrific. I wonder, I don't remember what the streetscape and tree plantings will be on that road and if Redbuds would work, but it would be terrific if we do name it Redbud, which I would be supportive of, to plant some red buds on that street to make the connection. And similarly on Cardinal Lane, the dogleg makes sense to me. But again, sort of finding a way, and Cardinal makes a lot of sense too. We were supportive of that last time, but if there could be a way to sort of visually connect, with cardinals in some way. I don't know if there's some public art that could be installed or themes, along the, some kind of visual connection to the streets names. I think that would be terrific.
That's an interesting idea. We have still a lot of placemaking exercises that need to be put into here, so maybe there can be some ties through that.
Mr. Stevens, your hand's back up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm pretty easy on accepting any name that the group thinks is good. But if we're just, kind of collecting a few more thoughts here, how about schools?
Sorry, School Street? Was that the recommendation?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, all right, let's see. I don't see any. Are there any speakers from the public on this item, Ms. Bazemore?
Not on this item, no.
Okay. Just checking. All right, well, if not, going once, going twice, then I'll close the public comment or public hearing portion for the purposes of public comment. So that brings us to, there any other final comments for staff? I guess the only question I might have for staff is I see the form of the format of the motion. I guess, we may, we're not obviously deciding, on exactly what this is going to be. We're providing our comments and our feedback to council. So I think what we might need to do is make some tweaks to this to kind of express our sounds like what I'm hearing is there's consensus amongst the commissioners on having some reservations about having a second Meridian Street, which is unfortunate. I guess I find it's funny that no one at the school board or the mayor or anyone else kind of thought about that. Maybe they did, and there's something we're missing, but I just think it's unfortunate, but I think it would just be too confusing to have another street in the city with the same name that's just nowhere near the other one. It just couldn't work. It would be very awkward, and it would inevitably lead to problems for people who live or have property on either street. So it's sounding like there's some consensus there, but otherwise, the other names as presented, the revised names, it seemed like there was general support behind those. I think maybe the best way we should do it is whoever's going to make the motion, we can suggest, talk about the names. We can endorse the names we like and provide some suggestions for, the one that we maybe we're not, needs some further thought. Ms. Weiss, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think creative brains, given some time, could think of some interesting themes along the lines of connecting to the schools and the education campus. So what I might suggest is, general support is provided for the names, blah, blah, like around that bullet point, we say, we do not support Meridian Street because there is another Meridian Street. We recommend naming the street using some other connection to the school campus over there. And then that gives, such as Husky Way, Husky Highway, or School Street.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fine. And we can mention that, or they can write or find another, native tree that, that might be appropriate, otherwise. So, or maybe there's, maybe there's some other directional type of name that could work. But yeah, I agree. I think we should provide council with some ideas, and I guess they'll be the final arbiter of what the right name is for that particular street. But it's an important street in that development, and hopefully they can come up with something that everyone can get behind. So at this point, unless there's any other questions for staff or the applicant here, I'll look for someone to start to tackle this motion. We're going to need to, as just discussed, make some adjustments to it as drafted by staff. So if anyone is feeling up to doing that, I would ask for somebody to make a motion on this item. If anyone's feeling so inspired. Ms. Weiss, your hand is up.
I mean, I can give it a whirl.
Sure, we would appreciate that. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, and I guess I'll do this based on the map that we just saw, which includes Redbud Alley. That makes sense. Okay, so let's see. I propose motion. Okay, so I moved that. Well, I can't remember how we start these things. So I'll just start with, whereas the West Falls Economic Development Project will provide a high-quality mixed-use development and serve as a gateway to the west end of the city of Falls Church. And whereas FCGP Development LLC has proposed names for the West Falls Economic Development Project, And whereas on October 25th, 2021, the City Council referred the proposed names to the Planning Commission for a review and recommendation pursuant to City Code Section 2-210. And now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission provide the following comments and recommendations to the City Council. Street names and/or themes should reflect the significance of and help establish placemaking for the site. There should be meaningful connection between the names of the streets, the built environment, and the nearby land uses. Possible themes include innovation, education, urban vibrant neighborhoods, wildlife, trees, and shrubs. Careful consideration should be given to avoid confusion with street names that may not be in the city but have Falls Church addresses. The suffixes of lane and way for the particular street segments where proposed should be reconsidered since these typically have a country feel and the approved development is designed to be an active, vibrant space. General support is provided for the names West Falls Boulevard because of the connection to the metro station, Arbor Way because of the proximity to the Memorial Grove, and Cardinal Lane because it is both the state bird and refers to compass direction. Proposed names of Magnolia and Mulberry are not recommended since they seem to have no connection to the approved development. The tree theme should include, actually, let me revise that. I would strike that sentence because those are no longer the map. General support is, so I'll restart with the bullet. General support is provided for the names West Falls Boulevard, Arbor Way, Cardinal Lane, and Redbud Alley because of the number of redbud trees in the city of Falls Church. The Planning Commission does not support the name Meridian Street because there is already a Meridian Street in the city of Falls Church. However, we do support other names that connect to the educational campus nearby. Compass direction.
Oops, there's a little bit of an echo there. Nope, it's gone. Okay. All right. So were you done, Ms. Weiss? Was that your motion? Okay, great. So we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second for said motion?
I'll second.
Ms. Teets seconds. Okay, so discussion now. First off, did staff get that? I know Ms. Bazemore can go back and listen, but just so we're clear, is everyone on board with the changes to the printed motion that Ms. Weiss made? Is there any discussion on that? Questions, concerns, suggestions? Ms. Coma, go ahead.
I just have one comment because I think the developer presented the second map as an alternative. So I think, if I'm correct, is Magnolia still on the table? If that's the case, then I think we might want to keep that line about Magnolia also not being recommended. Is that correct?
It was intended as a revised proposal, not an alternative necessarily.
I see. Okay, then the way Corey has it is great.
Okay. All right. Any other suggestions? Also, I didn't say this before, but we did receive written public comment on this item. So we all received that. Was in our package. So if anyone's watching wants to know if we've received that, we absolutely did. And there were some suggestions in there as well. And I know I read through the comments we got and the opinions that people provided. So if I didn't say that before explicitly, I'm just saying that now. We did, of course, receive that as recently as one that was provided on last week. So, okay. So we have the motion, we have the second. And is there any further discussion? If not, then I'll ask Ms. Bazemore for a roll call vote.
Chair Krasner,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
I just joined. I'll have to abstain.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Colmont,
Yes.
Mr. Hyra. All right.
Okay. That motion passes. And thank you, Mr. Fuentes, for joining. Mr. Hyra, I think, will be joining us soon, so we'll be up to full steam. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and good luck to City Council on figuring that out. And I think the folks on Meridian Street will be happy that we pointed out that they do in fact exist, and we haven't forgotten about them. I always tell people, actually, if you want to find one of the most confusing, like street sign, like intersections, at least in the local area, if you stand at the corner of West Street and Meridian Street, there's like, you have all the jurisdictions come together. So you have the Fairfax County street signs, the Arlington street signs, and they're all point in different directions with different names. It's quite amusing, actually, if you ever go by there and check it out. But Meridian's there in big black letters. So anyway, okay, moving.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aubrey. Moving right along. Our next item, 6B, is the Broad and Washington site plan public hearing. We've had this as a work session, it seems like several times, and we've obviously been working on this project over the course of many months, as has staff and the developers. So tonight's the public hearing on the site plan, and why don't we start off with a staff report. So I'll throw it over to staff.
All right, thank you, Chair and members of the Commission. As you mentioned, this item is before you for your action, for your final action tonight. This is also a public hearing item. It's the final action on the Broad and Washington site plan. And then the recommendation from staff is for Planning Commission to grant final approval of the site plan, a conditional final approval, noting several things that would be left to staff to handle administratively. And I'll just say by way of history that it is common for site plans on larger projects to have a number of items that the Planning Commission take action on and pass over to staff for administrative cleanup at the end. So that's a common practice. There is one requested waiver. There are a couple of requested waivers. And just in summary, the project is generally consistent with the conceptual development plan, which was reviewed and approved by council when the project was initially entitled. And before I go too deep into the staff report, I'll turn it over to the rest of the report to our case planner, Akita Ruzzi.
Thank you. Good evening. This is Akita Ruzzi. The item before you is the Broad and Washington site plan and subdivision applications for final consideration. Before I get to the staff's recommendation, a little bit of background on the project for the record. The City Council approved a special exception application and related conceptual development plan in January with a positive recommendation from the Planning Commission. A site plan submission and approval by the Planning Commission is the required next step in the process prior to building permitting. And just to clarify where we are in the public review process, the building footprint, building height, project uses, and voluntary concessions were approved with a special exception approval and conceptual development plan. In this current phase of the process at site plan, we're looking at further development of that approved conceptual plan, now with engineering details. So at this stage, we're not looking to have major changes from the conceptual development plan, but more refinement of the details presented in the site plan. Also part of the process at site plan is a subdivision plat that's required for the consolidation of the 4 separate parcels included in the development. The overall application also includes waivers to reduce the total required parking, reduction in buffer landscape density, and reduction in the required minimum distance between a commercial driveway and an R-zone district. These waivers are subject to approval by the Planning Commission as part of the site plan this evening. At the previous work session, we had identified several areas in the parking that did not meet zoning code requirements for column spacing and parking stall dimensions, which required a variance application. Planning Commission provided a lot of good feedback on that in terms of process and parking conditions. Since then, the applicant has worked hard on revisiting those nonconformities and redesigning around the structural challenges, and in the end was able to eliminate all of those nonconformities and column placement issues. So the parking spaces are now all conforming and no variances needed. In terms of application status, the Planning Commission held a work session on October 20th and provided feedback on the second submission. And as Mr. Krasner just said, we did have several work sessions leading up to that, and we've obtained a lot of good feedback. Sorry, I was having an echo there. Those comments from the Planning Commission are summarized on page 5 of the report. In terms of staff review, site plans are reviewed primarily for consistency with the approved conceptual development plan, comprehensive plan, site plan ordinance, and other applicable zoning code and regulations. Just to summarize those areas of review in the report, in terms of conceptual development consistency, the proposed site plan is generally consistent with the approved special exception, with some adjustments to building setback on Park Place, interior parking layout, addition of a second entrance on Park Place, reduction in total residential units from 339 to 334 units, minor architectural changes, and relocation of the transformers from the linear park to the west side of the building. There are no other major changes in terms of use, building footprint, project size, building height, and ADUs. The special exception parking ratios are generally the same, and the project still includes ground floor retail and an anchor grocer. The public open spaces are also generally the same size and design compared with the approved conceptual development plan we saw during the special exception. In terms of comprehensive plan and small area conformance, the development project is consistent with both plans as evaluated and concluded during the special exception process, so there's no change there. In terms of site plan code consistency, the current site plan demonstrates consistency with many of the considerations included in the site plan ordinance. During review, staff had identified several items to address as the project moves forward. One critical item staff identified to be addressed prior to Planning Commission action hearing tonight was neighborhood meetings with Lawton Street neighbors and adjacent businesses. Staff's understanding is that the applicant and the neighbors have been in meetings since then, and we encourage them to continue their coordination efforts as the project moves through construction. The remaining items starting at line 166 from the latest staff comments can be addressed after Planning Commission action during an administrative process. There's also some site plan cleanup items discussed in a subsequent email that was sent to the applicant. All of these are reflected in staff's proposed motion. With that, staff recommends Planning Commission approve the applications before them this evening. An approval condition is also included in the motion for a requirement to submit an updated final site plan addressing the pending issues listed in the report. Should the Planning Commission approve the applications tonight, in terms of schedule and next steps, the expectation would be for the applicant to continue working on their site plan to address the latest staff comments and work with the community on their concerns, and then submit a third submission for staff review and administrative approval by the planning director. That is all I have. Thank you for your time. I believe the applicant is present and also ready to make a presentation. I'm happy to take questions now or after that presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ruzzi. Okay, is there any questions for staff before we hear from the applicant? Mr. Puentes, go ahead.
Just a quick process question, and I'm sorry, I probably should know this by now. When does the parking management plan get submitted for staff to review?
Parking management plan is already included with the site plan. I think we called out things like some details of enforcement and further management details to be finalized prior to CO. I believe that's in either in our conditions or in the report, but the parking management plan is included.
Okay, thank you for that.
Let's see, any other questions for staff? If not, then I guess we'll throw it over to Mr. Stern. If he has anything he'd like to add or to summarize the changes based on Mr. Ruzzi did a pretty comprehensive job. Is there anything you'd like to add, Mr. Stern?
She did. We do have a quick presentation
Sure.
if Commissioner would like just to go through those changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't mind pulling it up. You can go to the next slide and I'll jump right into it. But I am joined by my colleague Ed Newman from Insight, Joe Riley Ryan from Bowman Consulting, our civil engineer, Maria Lassinger from Grove Slade, the traffic engineer, Neville Fernandez from MV&A, whom you all know very well, who's our project architect, and then Steve Sattler from Parker Rodriguez, who's our landscape architect. If we have questions on any of those topics, they are happy to jump in. But we tried to summarize here the issues that Ms. Ruzzi also summarized from our last work session, and also a couple comments that were the major comments from staff. But running through them quickly, Ms. Ruzzi touched on the first one. We spent a lot of time last time talking about the parking variance. We spent a lot of time listening to the recommendations from the commission, and we've reduced the parking by 2 total spaces, but been able to eliminate all of the non-conforming spaces and all of the compact spaces. And on the next slide, I can give you a little more detail on where that occurred, but the short story is the variance is no longer needed for parking. We also spent a lot of time last time talking about vents and where they are on the side of the building and along the park in the back. And we have a couple graphics that we've updated to better illustrate that. Parking signage is one of the items that is in the list of things that we will continue to work on and submit to staff for administrative approval. The traffic signal at the corner of Park and North Washington, we received kind of some preliminary approval from staff last week to release the poles, which is right now, due to all the supply chain issues around the world, an extremely long lead time item. So we are in the process of releasing those, but we're also waiting for staff for final approval, which I believe come concurrently with site plan approval. We will touch on briefly some of the more details on TDMs, which is a comment from the commission last time. And then just to clarify, electric vehicle charging stations, I know that was a big topic. We have 14 spaces or 7 kind of dual stations, 14 spaces in our plans now, 8 dual stations for 16 spaces in conduit for future. And then an idea we had in reading the infrastructure bill from Congress is there is funding for spaces within a public garage or a garage that has allows access to the public. So it's a little too early, but we want to explore whether there's funding that we can use to add additional EV stations throughout the garage. And that's something we are committed to doing as those details become more clear. And then Ms. Ruzzi touched on the neighborhood and both commercial and Lawton Street neighborhood input. We've met with all of them. We've had some subsequent smaller meetings from the dates seen here, but I feel like we've spent the time we needed to talk with all those groups. So on the next slide, just very briefly, I can show you the changes to the parking. There's a lot of numbers on this slide, but the punchline is the shared public parking spaces, the spaces that are for retail and the public to use concurrently, actually have increased by 2 spaces. The left side is what was approved in the CDP. The right side is what our current plans show. So we have 2 more spaces than we did at CDP approval. The Whole Food spaces remain the same at 210. The residential spaces have dropped from 338 to 334, but our unit count, as Ms. Ruzzi said, has also dropped from 339 at that time to 334. And then the public parking spaces have remained the same at 64. So the bottom line is we've lost 2 spaces overall. We gained 2 in the shared public. We lost 4 in the residential for a net loss of 2, but we still have 1 space per unit and feel like this 684 space garage works perfectly, and we no longer need the variances we talked about last time. And then on the next slide, we can actually skip through the next several slides if you don't mind, Ms. Bazemore, to I think the next one. Yes, thank you. Briefly on canopy trees, this is a comment that we received from the Lawton Street neighbors and some subsequent comments from staff. From the green is what was shown in the CVP, the pink is what's currently shown in the site plan. So some trees have shifted, obviously, as we've refined the design. But the bottom line for the overall site here is that we removed 1 tree on Park Place to add the second parking entrance, but we added a tree on Lawton Street at the bottom left near the plaza. So net canopy trees are even in the overall site. And then on the next slide, if you look at the 2 parks, the plaza and the park, you can see a little more detail on the plaza. We had 7 in the CDP. We have 7 now. And then the change we made was in response to some meetings with the Lawton neighbors, was adding a canopy tree kind of behind 107 Lawton as you head north along the park to Park Place. And overall, on this part in the park, we added 2 trees since the CDP. So we're net on the site plus 2 canopy trees for the whole site from the CDP. And then I'll quickly turn it over to Ed to talk a little bit more about TDM and the events.
Sure thing. Good evening, everybody. This is Ed Duman with Insight Property Group. Ms. Bazer, if we move to the next slide, we can provide a little bit more information. So a question that's come up a few times throughout this last round of submission is what the vents on the side of the building are going to look like, whether they're going to be flush or protruding. The plan is to have these vents flush with a metal finish that's powder coated to match the facade materials. They'll be specifically placed to be in line with the facade and be aesthetically attractive. But so that's the current plan for our exterior facing vents. And if we move to the next slide, another venting item that has been brought up once or twice that we've talked about is the Lawton Street Park side. So there is some garage exhaust area and generator radiator discharge that happens in this area. It's all contained in this screened facade. If Ms. Bazemore, if you move to the next slide, you'll be able to kind of see it better. I think we added some updated rendering so it's easier to visualize, but this is what the area is going to look like. We have landscaping. It's going to be completely clad in the same stone facade as we have on the back of the building, and should be minimal impact to the park and our neighbors. And if you move to the next slide, I wanted to go over the TDM commitments that we're willing to go through. I think this has come up a few times, but just to run through what is in the TDM plan and what we're planning to do. So for site design and infrastructure, the actual physical accommodations that we're putting in, including bicycle storage, electric scooter spaces, as well as maintaining the current bike share and pedestrian upgrades. Those are all included in the site plan. We're also including bus shelters for public transportation. We're planning to include spaces within the property for ride sharing, carpooling, van pooling, etc. And we're also reserving some spaces for car sharing, like a zip car type of service, with an emphasis on trying to make that service EV friendly and include as much EV as we can, as Mr. Stern mentioned. As far as the promotion and incentives portion of our TDM commitments, we plan to have a TDM coordinator on staff at the building for both the site as well as the residential portion. Some incentives and programs that will be in place are having a site plan access guide provided throughout the property, whether it's the residential or retail, for general knowledge of how to get to the space and use public transit to get there. Real-time travel information provided via transit screens. That's something we typically do to provide exact timing for the metro, buses, etc. Additionally, our staff on site will make concerted efforts to market and emphasize public transit and walkability within the area, including perhaps an incentive with a $100 Smart Trip card if you sign a lease, events and contests based on public transit usage, as well as coordination with local vendors and restaurants, businesses, etc., with the property to encourage folks to use those businesses, walk, use the space, and have a vibrant corner of the city center. And then as far as the monitoring and enforcement, we're willing to report our traffic, parking, and commute survey stats on an annual basis if that's what's requested. That's something we're willing to commit to. And then, as Mr. Stern mentioned earlier, our CDP included 5 spaces for EVs and 5 spaces for future EVs. We are exceeding that with 14 spaces on the current plans and 16 spaces for potential future EVs. And again, as Mr. Stern mentioned, we're more than willing to add some more if this infrastructure bill gives us the flexibility to do so. And at this juncture, I will pass it off to Noel Fernandez with MBNA to go over the exterior of the building.
Thank you, Ed. Good evening, everybody. We're starting at the vantage point from the corner of Broad and North Washington Street. The architectural story here is 100% similar to what we showed in the CDP. We plan to keep it that way. There may be some minor modifications as we detail it, but the architectural story is going to remain unchanged, and the building will appear the way you're seeing it on the screen. At last week's AAB, we got a few comments, some minor comments to look at certain areas, and we will continue to work and detail that. But in general, this architectural story is staying unchanged. Next slide, please. I think we talked about this last time. There are some minor changes here. The north face of the building abutting our neighbor's property. We made some minor modifications to the depth of the articulations, but the real architectural story here is still also unchanged. We have, for the 4-story architecture along Park Place, we have added another panel on the right side where it gets close to the blackish tower, as we've got several comments to kind of help alleviate that portion of the project. So we think, continuing that panel and continuing that story around there should solve the problem. One thing you're also seeing here is on top of that mass, you're seeing a small little projection out there. We're working with Whole Foods and they require some space to do some mechanical equipment. So we're putting it up there in the roof. It's pushed 30, 40 feet away from the edge of the building. It is screened. And the only place where you're going to see it is really from this vantage point, just across the sidewalk on Washington Street. But again, it's going to be screened. It's a small little projection up there, but you will not notice it when you're walking in along Park Place or anywhere near the building. That's the only one change that we've been working on. We thought it's time to show where we are with it. Next slide, please. Here's a close-up of the entrance along Park Place. I think we saw this again. It's very, very similar. I think the only difference is you're seeing that panel on the right that's been added, the red color panel, to accentuate that part of the side and kind of break up the cadence of the windows. But otherwise, everything here has been shared before. The 2 entrances along Park Place and the landscaping and the approach and the sidewalk along this face. Everything else is really very, very similar to how we've showed in the CDP. Next, please. Here's the viewpoint from Broad and Lawton Street. Again, very, very almost 100% similar to the CDP, with the exception of one big change. We have increased the amount of brick at this corner along Lawton Street. That whole mass that was previously shown as fiber cement in the CDP is now brick. And for my calculations, the amount of brick here exceeds the amount that was approved in 2018. So we're very happy with that change. Next slide, please. This is again the view up Lawton Street, and you see that same brick mass that's now on the left side of the screen turn the corner and kind of really, dominate much of the facade along Lawton Street. But again, everything around here, material-wise, massing-wise, it's very, very, very similar to what we had in the CDP. Next, please. Actually, that was the last slide.
Yes, so with that, we're happy to take any questions or get into more details. But as the slide says, we think the project is ready for you all to take action.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Prentice, your hand is up. Is that from before, or is that now it's down? Okay, Mr. Stevens, your hand is up. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I've got some discussion in 3 areas. The first one's, I guess it's kind of a suggestion for staff, has to do with the LEED scorecard. And I had raised the question on the last work session, what the 2 points for the green power and carbon offsets was comprised of. And I don't think, Mr. Stern, you knew at that point. I'm just wondering whether you've been able to find out what is intended for those 2 points.
I believe that it would be some combination of kind of buying offsets, for power that's produced with alternative fuels or solar to offset our, power that we're getting from the grid. There are some other mechanisms for doing that, but that's the one that we've most done in the past. But it's essentially, using dollars to offset the power we're generating we're taking from the grid that's typically coal-fired.
Yeah, and actually, I certainly like the idea of it offsetting with renewable energy, and particularly for renewable energy produced in Virginia. That would be kind of prime. The other area on the LEED scorecard has to do with the energy and atmosphere section, which particularly deals with the optimized energy performance. The city recently has adopted a new goal to achieve a 20% improvement in energy efficiency below the LEED benchmark. Obviously, this has come along after discussions with this project started. But I noticed on the lead score sheet that there's only 5 points that are indicated for the optimized energy performance. So I'm going to assume that that does not achieve the 20% goal. So it could be that if we added this item, the lead scorecard, to the list of administrative items on the planning director's list, perhaps both the green power and carbon offset can be identified, and also to see whether or not through additional discussion some additional improvement can be made in that optimized energy performance area to get a bit closer to the city's goal if possible. So that's just, like I said, mostly a suggestion for the staff. Second item has to do with perhaps we could go back to the elevation that you had on North Washington Street. It's on the corner of North Washington and yeah, that one right there. And I had a couple of questions regarding the utility poles and the sidewalk there. First of all, on the utility poles, that nicely shows all 3 of the utility poles that are next to Clarendon's removed. Is that in fact the intention?
So no, the one there's one that's next to Clarendon's that feeds power to Clarendon's and Thompson's, and I believe it may actually feed potentially the State Theater or something else across the street. That one will remain, but everything from that point of that pole all the way in front of our site to there's a pole that sits kind of at the corner of the back of 107 Lawton and 203 Lawton. Everything from that Clarendon's pole to the pole at the back of those 2 houses will be undergrounded.
So 2 of the 3 that are next to Clarendon's will remain?
I am not familiar with what all 3 are. I mean, we're keeping one that supplies power to those businesses. I'm not positive what the other one is that you're referencing.
Well, there's 3 right now. There's 3 poles right along Clarendon's. I was looking at it today. And I wasn't sure from your explanation how many of those 3 are planned to be removed. Well, for one thing, I think it's surprising because they probably looked at this elevation and thought, aha, they're all going to be undergrounded. That sounds like that's not the case.
I don't know, Joe, if you jump in, if you have any better explanation about the 3 poles. I apologize, I do not.
No, I think you had it correct that, between the pole that's feeding Clarendon's and the one at the cul-de-sac is what we're undergrounding, but the ones closer to the intersection are, all those poles are remaining. And
well, I know it's not in the voluntary concession, so I think it is what it is, but I do believe that's going to be a surprise to some people who were expecting perhaps on this type of a view, not realizing that that's not what it's going to look like when it's done. The other question I had has to do with the entrance that is going to be for the public spaces. I know as you enter that space, I believe there are several ADA spaces immediately on the close to the entrance. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Ms. Bazemore, if you didn't mind going back to one of the first slides, we do have a plan of that level. It's near the beginning of the presentation. I think it's, sorry, if you don't mind going down a couple.
You passed it. There you go.
Yep, that was the green with the green level. A couple up, one more maybe. Sorry,
it's page 4.
That's
yeah. So ADA spaces there. If someone were to come in and park in that space, is the sidewalk along Park Place now going to be completed all the way to North Washington Street so that someone who is, an ADA eligible person, would they have a complete sidewalk to get to both Clarendon's and Thompson Italian?
That's my understanding. We are putting in sidewalk from essentially the back of 107 and 203 Lawton all the way in front of our site to connect to the existing sidewalk adjacent to Clarendon's. So yes, Joe can weigh in on slopes and grades, but my understanding is that it will be accessible.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that's good, because today I noticed that there's a gap in that sidewalk along Park Place there, and suddenly I wasn't sure whether the plan was to put in the brick sidewalk all the way from the parking garage entrance to the corner of North Washington Street. So that's good to hear that that is the case. Okay, that's that item. The last item I had to do with the deeded spaces, and I suggested during the work session the last time that it would, since we now have these 64 spaces spread across 3 levels, that it would be very helpful to have some type of an electronic display that would show for people entering the garage that want to park in one of those 64 spaces, that if if the P3 level spaces are full, that there's an electronic display there so that they can determine whether or not there are vacant spaces on the P2 and P1 levels. Is that something that you've looked at and can perhaps agree to install?
We have looked at a number of technology options that we've proposed to the city, and I think the collective decision was to put off deciding what technologies we use until closer to CO. That, you know, I'm not an expert on parking equipment and technology, but my understanding, like most technologies, is it's changing dramatically. And so if we committed to something today, it's probably going to be outdated 2.5 years from now when we open. So I think the decision amongst staff and city management and our team was to delay the decision on what technology. Our intention is to use technology. We still do need some parameters from the city on, you know, what, in addition to just identifying spaces, what that technology enforces, who can and can't park where. It's not as simple as just saying we will identify how many spaces are available to the public. It's a whole system that has a whole lot of other parameters that we have not gotten the input on what those are to be able to commit to exactly what that system looks like. But the short answer is we will be using some technology to do the things that you're saying, but I can't commit to say that it absolutely will do exactly what you said without having all those other parameters and without knowing what the technology looks like 2 years from now.
Yeah, well, I would agree with you. We certainly don't want to be brand specific in terms of the technology because it is changing rather rapidly. But there is technology available today, and presumably it's only going to get better as far as doing some basic identification of whether spaces are available at a lower level. I was noticing in the staff letter that there were a couple of the letters that brought this issue up. One is from Susan Bell, and she characterized the deeded spaces as not comparable to the existing surface lot in terms of access to retail in the vicinity of the project. And she also references the distribution of the spaces as being an issue. And then the city's zoning administrator, Mr. Boyle, indicated that the proposed plan scatters the public spaces throughout the parking garage and will be met by very strong public opposition. I think he's right, but at least I think we can assuage that a little bit by indicating to people before they have to make the effort to drive down the ramp that yes, there are spaces available, or no, there aren't. So I think if we could keep it at a very general level, and I would certainly agree that discussing this with staff as part of the administrative items is probably appropriate, but that we put something in our resolution that indicates that this type of technology will be utilized to facilitate information to people wanting to use those 64 spaces.
My only other hesitation is for the lack of input from the city. There are 76 spaces that are open to the public as well to share with retail. So if the direction is that we want to put identification that the 64 spaces are either available or not available, we can do that, but that means that the rest of the 76 are then off limits to the public. And that's counter to the way this garage was designed and all the previous conversations with city council staff and even this commission. So I think that's where I hesitate to commit to anything, because we have not gotten really any feedback from the city on how all those spaces interact, and it's complicated. It's not as simple as just saying 64 spaces are available or not available. But if we want to make it that simple, we can commit to that tonight.
Sorry, I missed your last point.
If the request is that we commit to identifying whether the 64 spaces are available or not available, and we can do whatever we want with the other 76, I'm happy to commit to that. But until there's better direction on what happens with those 76, I think it would be short-sighted to commit to anything tonight about the 64 spaces that are the public's.
Yeah, well, I agree to keep it general would be best, but I think it's something we don't want to lose. Given the way that these parking spaces have been displayed, I'm just concerned that once the public kind of discovers the way these spaces are laid out, that there's going to be a lot of disappointment. So that at least if we can point to having some type of an electronic display to give information, such as that which already exists over at Mosaic, and it's pretty rudimentary. It doesn't look like it's very complicated to just indicate how many spaces are open on which floor. That would at least go a good part of the way to indicating to people that they haven't lost everything in terms of what they had by way of convenience from the existing public parking space. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. No, all very good points. Okay. Any other comments from commissioners on this item before I open it up to the public, if we have any public? Ms. Coma, go ahead.
I just wanted to second Mr. Stevens' suggestion to have some sort of vehicle detection technology. I understand it may be complicated, but I do think that would be really helpful considering how the public spaces are arranged. I hope that you can work with staff to figure that out. The project is definitely going to make the public parking that we have a little harder to access, I think, maybe. And so it would be definitely helpful to have some sort of informational display for the public.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Calmont. Any other commissioner questions or comments? Okay, don't see any. Ms. Bazemore, so this is a public hearing. Are there any public, I don't think we received any updated written comments. Anyone who contacted you to speak at this public hearing?
No, not for this item.
Okay. Just checking. All right, we did, and as I mentioned, we did previously receive written public comments earlier in the process. Okay, so with that, I will close the public hearing portion, and that brings us to starting the discussion about a motion. The staff has drafted a comprehensive motion that tries to lay out the remaining items that might be appropriate to defer to them at the administrative level. I'll just say at the outset, I'm very pleased with the changes to remove the need for the parking variance. I said to Mr. Stoddard earlier today that I like it when sort of common sense prevails, and I thought that the previous version, although I understood sort of where it was coming from, just I just knew there had to be just a more straightforward solution to this, and I appreciate the applicant working with us on that. And I was pleased to see that. So with that, I would look to see if any commissioners are prepared to tackle this motion. Mr. Stevens, yeah, you've been pretty involved in this one. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'm happy to give it a roll. First of all, I just want to make sure I wasn't stepping on any other commissioner who wanted to make comments before I proceed with this. And it doesn't look like it. So what I would do is kind of utilize the staff proposal here that's the proposed motion, and then under the item that has the planning director administrative items, there's 6 items there now. I would propose to add a 7th, and I'll just kind of go through what I have here quickly and then go back and read the motion. Site plan approval include a commitment to install an electronic display indicating the number and floor of available spaces in the deeded parking space area, with details to be worked out in consultation with the planning director. And so with that, I think I can go ahead and propose a motion. Whereas the Planning Commission finds approval of the site plan and related waivers and modifications is consistent with the objectives of Division 7 Site Plans, Chapter 48-1137, as well as the approved special exception and conceptual development plan. And whereas the requested waivers and modifications would not be substantially detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the community. And whereas the requested subdivision for consolidation of subject parcels in the development meets all applicable requirements of the city's subdivision and zoning ordinances and is consistent with special exception conceptual development plan. Now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission approve site plan application number 2019-0179 and the requested waivers and modifications subject to the following condition. Applicants submit an updated final site plan to be reviewed administratively and approved by the planning director that addresses staff comments on the topics of 1, architecture, confirm and refine building architecture, including A, confirm residential vents will be flush to building face and treated to blend with the building face, especially along public facing facades. 2, confirm final materials and colors. Note staff may refer final materials to Architectural Advisory Board for their review. C, refine North Washington Street facade by introducing layering, such as turning one course of brick sideways or other technique to visually separate the floors without detracting from overall design. D, refine West Broad Street facade by extending brick facade one floor higher or other treatment to make the top 2 floors look less tall to address proportion to middle and base. 2, generator exhaust vents and garage vents. Write up in visual graphics showing the design of these items that reduces noise for neighboring properties and avoids hiding or blind spots in parking space. 3, parking signage, interior and exterior wayfinding signage for public parking as committed to in the voluntary concessions. 4, parking enforcement. Develop a parking enforcement mechanism for the deeded public spaces to be finalized prior to issuance of first certificate of occupancy and jointly agreed to by applicant and city manager. 5, North Washington Park Place signal. Coordinate with public works engineers to finalize design details. 6, development review committee comments. All remaining staff comments on the second site plan submission should be addressed to the extent possible in subsequent submissions. Additionally, all supplemental comments in the attached email dated November 16th, 2021 must be addressed. And 7, site plan approval include a commitment to install an electronic display indicating the number and floor of available spaces in the deeded parking space area, with details to be worked out in consultation with the planning director. I further move that the Planning Commission grant approval of preliminary and final subdivision plats included in sheets 53A and B of the site plan in attachment 1.
Whew. All right. Good job, Mr. Stevens, on that. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
It's Monday seconds. So now a discussion. Just something I just realized Mr. Stevens was running through that. Just a question for staff, since you're referencing an email dated November 16, 2021. Is that in our package? Have we already seen that email? If so, I'm not familiar with that. Am I missing something?
It is, should be at the very end, very last attachment. They're just minor technical and typo corrections to the updated site plan.
Okay, I did see that. I just didn't see the date on that. Okay. All right, so we'll be attaching. I want everyone to be clear, so that would mean we're incorporating by reference. I'm looking at your email, Ms. Ruzzi. So there's 8 items on that. So does everyone know? I want to make sure all the commissioners know that that's included as well. They're kind of technical, or just some of them maybe typographical errors or things that need to be fixed. But as long as everybody is familiar with that. So okay, Mr. Puentes, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, I don't mean to belabor the point. I feel like we're missing something with all the parking elements that are still unresolved, right? We have numbers 3 and 4 that's in the motion that Mr. Stevens went through, in addition to then his number 6. At the last meeting, we talked about things like paid parking. We talked about payment systems. And I know you said that the parking management plan is included in the package. The best thing that I can see is this document dated August of this year. And there's a paragraph in there that says a formal parking plan will be submitted to the staff for review prior to the approval of the site plan. And then it's got a bunch of bullets that talks about the things that we've already talked about here today, about enforcement, about hours of operation, all kinds of different things. So I'm not opposed to all this. I'm just confused about the process and when all this then gets delivered to us, because there seems to be some things missing, which is okay, I guess, if we're going to get that later. But then it says, this note about it coming in prior to approval of the site plan. So I'm just trying to make sure we have the order correct, given that this parking stuff seems to be complicated. And I just want to make sure we're getting the order right. I don't know quite what I'm looking for, but I think we need some kind of formal parking plan that incorporates all these items we talked about here. And I'm just curious when that comes in.
Right. Well, it's not. Yeah. I mean, this would not come back to us. So Ms. Ruzzi, can you respond to Mr. Puente's question?
Sure. I think I can't remember the sheet number, but there is a parking management plan in the site plan. It's printed on the site plan sheet. So it does.
49 to 50. Sorry, Akita.
Oh yeah, no problem. There you go. So that does outline some general commitments and parking management techniques. And I think what we have in the motion and then in our staff comments is, I think staff would like to see more details. And so those are the details that we are expecting to finalize prior to release of the site plan. And that's really after the planning director approves during the administrative process. The hope is to get those details finalized, and then the planning director, if it's in an acceptable form, would then sign off on the site plan to be released to the applicant. So I think we're expecting to finalize these details during the administrative process. But there is, Mr. Fuentes, that there is a parking management plan in the site plan, sheet 49.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it doesn't have all these things we've talked about here today. It includes some of them, but not. I mean, the smart technology thing, but I think paid parking is an important part of this, and payment systems and all that. But if staff is okay with the process, then I'm okay. I don't want to belabor the point, but it feels like there's something convoluted about the way this is all coming together here at the end.
I can speak to that a little bit, Commissioner. The one of the things at the staff level that we've been interested in is working with the applicant so that the sort of rules for the use of the deeded spaces as well as the retail spaces that are being provided as part of the project, so that those two sets of spaces are operating under the same rules. I think, probably what we're thinking about is, the first 1, maybe 2 hours, depending on time of day. Maybe it's 4 hours, depending on time of day. But the first so many hours would be free of charge. And then after that, you might incur some sort of charge for being in those spaces. So the idea is that they'd function, sort of as people expect them to for commercial spaces, that they would be there for sort of ease of use, but then they would sort of encourage some sort of turnover or sort of prevent long-term parking by introducing a charge the longer people stayed there. But the goal, as I said, is to get all those spaces, the approximately 64 deeded spaces, as well as the sort of 70 some odd sort of private retail spaces working the same way, so that when someone enters the garage, they're encouraged to just take the first spot they find, get out of the car, and then start walking. So that people don't feel like they have to hunt through the garage to find the best deal for them, that they'd all just operate under the same set of rules.
Thank you for that. We've talked about enforcement in a couple of areas too. Does that get resolved then at that time? I think this whole idea about unbundling the units from the parking is very smart and really encourage that. But I think staff had a really good comment about, well, how do we make sure that people aren't unbundling their parking and then using parking anyway? Things like that.
Right. So part of that is that the city doesn't really have a staff capacity to manage a 64 deeded spaces inside the garage. We don't have a patrol officer or a public safety officer to go to patrol this garage. So the idea is that if we had the same set of rules on the city spaces as well as the private spaces, then the private side could manage those spaces for us through the same system they're using. Whether that's some sort of payment system or voucher, whatever it is that they're planning to do, if that was acceptable to the city, they could manage it for us. And exactly as you said, the intent is to make it easy for people who are going to the nearby restaurants and other businesses to use the spaces, and prevent people who are residents in the building from parking there overnight or longer term, and thereby sort of replacing the idea is that those spaces be available for commercial use. And so how you enforce those is important to prevent sort of the residential parking from sort of spilling over into the commercial.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Let's see. Any other comments on the motion? Any other, or other just general comments, questions on the motion, or just other points of discussion? Again, I think I said this just a little earlier. I mean, it's come a long way. There's still a list. I kind of agree a little bit with Mr. Puentes. There's sort of a larger than typical list of items that are being deferred to the staff to deal with, which I guess always gives us a little bit of pause. That whether or not it's ready, and that it's the site plan is there. I think that in this case, the list is long. The nature of the items is generally small in nature, with perhaps some of the lingering questions about parking, management. But I think I'm pretty much there, especially once we get rid of the need for a variance. So that's kind of where I'm at. Ms. Weiss, your hand is up.
Yeah, this just two comments. And I don't think it's not to suggest changing the motion, but I did want to just underline Mr. Stevens' comments earlier about wanting to see follow-up on what the lead score sheet offsets are in reference to. I just want to support following up on that, even if it doesn't show up in a motion, and understanding the energy optimization. And just wanted to kind of, circle 1C on the motion here, refining the North Washington Street facade. That facade, I mean, I think we are where we are with the project now, but with Mr. Stevens pointing out that not all the telephone poles or the utility poles that are there will be gone. That view will not be attractive coming in to the city, I fear. And so, whatever we can do to that facade, whether it's adding and layering or whatever, it's just, it doesn't sit right with me, and I just wanted to share that, improve that this stuff as we come into town, I think would be terrific. Otherwise, I support the motion as Mr. Stevens read it.
Thank you, Ms. Weiss. Okay, anybody else have anything else to add on the motion? Okay, well, if not, then we have the motion, we have the second. I haven't heard any other edits or revisions. So we'll go to a roll call vote on the motion as read or as made and seconded by Mr. Stevens and seconded by Mr. Puentes.
Chair Krasner,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Teeth,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Colmont,
Yes.
Mr. Hyra.
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes and the site plan and subdivision is approved for the Broad and Washington project. Again, thanks to the applicant, thank you to staff. It's been a long process. It's not over yet for staff and the applicant. The applicant's kind of just getting started in some ways, but again, appreciate everybody's work on this project. Really, in some ways a transformational type of project at the 100% corner in the city, and we're excited to see it continue to progress and move on to the next phase.
Thank you all. We are too.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Stern, and to your team and everybody else for working with us through the process, and we appreciate all your efforts and the time spent with us, and of course the many hours I'm sure you've spent behind the scenes working through this process. Okay, moving right along. That takes us to item 6C, which is our third and our final public hearing for the evening. And this is a public hearing on a rezoning and special exception. I'll read it because we didn't, just so we're clear, it's the public hearing on the rezoning of 0.98 acres from T1 to B1 at 1001 and 1003 West Broad by Mill Creek Residential Trust LLC, and also the public hearing on the special exception for residential uses within a mixed-use development, and to increase the building height with a bonus of 30 feet to a maximum of 85 feet for the project on 2.07 acres located at 1001 and 1003 West Broad by Mill Creek Residential Trust LLC. So we will start off, I guess, with a staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. So this item is before you, as you said, is a public hearing item. It's also scheduled in your agenda as an action item for tonight for you all to make a recommendation to council. As you noted, there are two legislative items before you. First is the rezoning, and second is the special exception. Based on, this was before you as a work session item at your last meeting, based on direction provided by the Planning Commission, a couple things happened. First, at the staff level, we did break out the motion so that there are two proposed motions, one on the rezoning, one on the special exception, in case you all wanted to make any distinctions on those two actions. And then second, on the applicant side, they did provide revised materials, which are included in your packet. The revised materials take the form of an update memo, redline voluntary concessions, as well as exhibits showing things like turning movements, pedestrian improvements, open space calculations. So those are included as in your packet as well tonight. But without telling the whole story, I'm actually going to turn it over to the case planner on this one, Jeff Hollering.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Holland with the planning staff. As Paul had mentioned, tonight, Planning Commission has requested to hold a public hearing on the amended second submission for Founders Road 2. This consists of a rezoning amendment, zoning map amendment, and a special exception to allow residential development in a mixed use development, and to allow up to 21 feet of height bonus that exceeds the height of 55 feet for proposed 76 feet of building height proposed within the project. Staff is recommending tonight the approval of the proposed motion in the title block of the staff report. The staff has concluded that the proposed rezoning and special exception is generally consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and downtown small area plan, and substantially achieves the goals of the comprehensive plan. The Planning Commission discussed Founders Row 2 as a work session item on November 3rd. And then on November 9th, the applicant submitted some supplementary documents, as Paul had mentioned, in response to the comments that they've received from the Planning Commission, as well as some of the other boards and commissions so far. Those comments and the applicant's responses are in a table on line number, but if you are looking for the list of comments that have been had previously and the responses in these exhibits, that's where you'll find them in the staff report. And I guess that's actually where I'm going to leave the staff report for tonight. I'm going to hand you over to the applicant, and then as well as the public hearing. And then I will stick around if you have any comments for staff. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. All righty. Is that working for you all?
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Actually, give me 1 second so I can full screen that. A little bit easier for everyone to see. Well, thank you all for having me tonight. I will preempt this by saying I apologize. I'm coming off of a little bit of a cough, so I've got a scratchy voice. So I do apologize if I sound a little off tonight, but thank you for having us again. The work session 2 weeks ago was incredibly productive, and our team endeavored. We heard you loud and clear. You wanted to not just hear what we were going to do, you wanted to see what we're going to do. So what we're going to show you here is essentially, I don't want to say it's nothing new, but it's visual cues to what we've been speaking about throughout this 2-month board and commission process. So a lot of visuals, a lot of graphics. You've seen most of them. We did provide a memo and exhibits to everyone last week. But we're going to, I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. But I do want this to be a comprehensive summary so that at the end of this evening, you all are left with, all right, you are now showing us what you said you're going to do. And I also want to put out the understanding that, this is preemptive to a third and final submission. So this is not the definitive final end product, but rather this is reflective of the conversations that we've had to date. So that being said, I'll go ahead and just start clicking through some of these slides. This starts all, there's essentially 2 sections to this. One is addressing the staff report comments from last time, which again, loud and clear. These were the 8 items that were on the staff report that we have addressed verbally, and now I will show you point by point how we have addressed them visually or in the voluntary concessions, how they will be incorporated into the design. One other point to note is that many of these things are things that continue to be defined, not just through the special exception, but also through the site plan, transportation, technical details, design. Those are things that will continue to be refined, but taking those that feedback today is certainly helpful as well. So again, we'll go through these point by point. The first big session is on transportation and pedestrian safety. Those were the bulk of the comments, and frankly, that's been the bulk of the conversation with boards, commissions, neighbors, and everyone throughout this. You've seen this slide before. This is essentially a summary of the proposed improvements. The one thing to note on this is that in our voluntary concessions, we will be increasing our request of a parking reduction from 17% to 22%. So I do want to state that and memorialize it, that would be in our submission. And we'll go through all of this in detail as I click through this now. So first off, address neighborhood traffic calming measures. There's a few slides on this. We're going to go point by point to intersection around the project. This is the northwest corner of the project. This is the garage entry onto West Broad Street. You can see on the right is the current condition, and on the left is the proposed condition. Things to note here is chiefly this is the median break that we are proposing on creating to allow people direct access from the garage onto West Broad Street rather than have to deviate onto West Street and then onto West Broad Street. This has a material impact, not just on the queuing on West Broad Street, but the way that, on the queuing on West Broad Street and the way the traffic works at that signal. We have dedicated a left turn out lane here so that you're not backing up and it doesn't discourage people from using this. Now you can make the right-hand turn or you can make the left-hand turn separately. We have included things such as bollards and mirrors for pedestrian safety to ensure that this crosswalk here is monitored as best as we possibly can. In addition to making this turn feasible by including signage, don't block the box, enforceable measures that allow for this left-hand turn movement. And again, this does have a material impact on that signalized intersection, the performance there. So that's one traffic calming measure. The second, there was some dialogue last week about how exactly is this intersection going to work at West and Broad Street with the signal changes that we are proposing that's going to allow for concurrent left-hand turns. So as you can see here, you can see visually how the cars are able to turn in those movements concurrently with left-hand turns. You can see the realignment of the intersections, especially compared from where they are today to where they are now. In addition to the width of these sidewalks, 6 feet barely now to maybe 30 feet here. So much, much wider sidewalks that will allow for free and clear movement, bikes, pedestrians, kids walking to and from school without bunching up around these intersections. These intersections will have accessible ramp improvements as well to help with the traffic flow. So I think that's, that is a big point of emphasis there. And we've talked about that this signal is going to degrade. It's essentially an F where it is today failing. We're going to bring that up to at least a D. And a D is not a bad grade from a traffic performance metric. It's indicative of a good multimodal, or at least a solid multimodal intersection. So again, you've seen this slide before, but I do think that's important pointing out that that's how we're going to be accommodating these great improvements of that intersection. Lastly is, again, traffic calming measures and also adjustments to intersection to support safe left turns, which we've talked about the other intersections as well. On Southwest Street, we will be performing realignments of crosswalks, both across West Street and then north on Ellison Street. Maybe just as importantly, the biggest issues on West Street right now are the queuing and the speed. The queuing we've talked about by alleviating traffic out of the garage and working on the intersection. Speed, we have multiple ways of trying to accommodate this. One of the most effective ways is providing these collars on the sidewalks here, these bump outs that reduce the width of the crosswalk from 35 feet to 22 feet. That inherently slows down traffic and makes for a safer pedestrian crossing. With the reduced speed, it also allows for more effective Ellison Street left turn out movements as well. One last thing that isn't shown on here but will be incorporated is in the VCs is radar speed signs, the flashing radar speed signs to show what your speed is. That has a proven effect on slowing down traffic. It's one of the best mitigators we have from a traffic calming perspective. Two things I would like to point out on this exhibit. I do have my engineers here as well, so they can pitch in if you have more technical questions on this. But there's been two questions about this intersection in particular. One is this crosswalk being relocated to the north side of Ellison Street so that it connects with the sidewalks that come all the way down here. That's problematic for multiple reasons, one of which, by pulling it north here, you have cars that are going to be making a right-hand turn out of Ellison that are inherently looking left while crosswalk is occurring to the right of them. That's a dangerous condition. That's not what's happening here. Two, you have existing accessible ramps here. By relocating them up here, there's a lot of dramatic impacts on that. In addition to the fact that I believe technically or legally, the city's not allowed to completely relocate accessible locations like that. So that's a problematic issue as well. The last piece is that by bringing that crosswalk closer to this intersection where people are coming around the corner provides a little bit more of a dangerous crosswalk as well. So there are technical reasons for this. I've been personally supportive of relocating the crosswalk, but after speaking with engineers, I don't think in good conscience we can safely do that in a capacity that works, which is why the crosswalk is here. The second point that got brought up last week was making this a raised crosswalk, which we've investigated as well. Two issues with that. Namely, it's the topography. We all know how significantly West Street drops off here. That has two impacts. One of the impacts is on water. Water coming down here with a raised crosswalk, you're going to have pooling issues, which again, you can probably solve through engineering, but you will have pooling issues that can be solved to a degree, but not entirely. The other is, and I don't have the specific example, but I know this exists elsewhere in the city, when you have accessible crosswalks on topo that's going like this, the way you have to ramp it and flatten it out and make the angles, this ends up not being much of a raised crosswalk at all, frankly. So there's multiple technical engineering things here. And what I would say to any neighbors and residents listening in the public, we are truly endeavoring. There are other things that we're studying as well. Everything when it comes to traffic is a give and a take. It's a domino effect. And while, you know, I on this side of the table, very much, I don't understand the engineering exactly. And I could say, yeah, no, a crosswalk there makes sense. There's always a give and a take and safety concerns and how it impacts, you know, turning angles and how it impacts queuing and et cetera, et cetera. We believe what we proposed here are very fundamentally solid and safe traffic calming measures that will help this intersection, that will assist with Ellison Street making that left-hand turn out. And again, we continue to explore other measures as well. This is absolutely a site plan item as well. This is not something that gets finalized today or a special exception approval. This is something that continues down the road. Second point now, consideration of a larger reduction of parking with a focus on multimodal accessibility. We have increased our parking reduction from 17% to 22%. We have set aside 3 parking spaces for rideshare and food delivery pickup within our garage. As you can see right here, they're designated. That will be on site plan. It's in our voluntary concessions. This location allows for drivers to drop off food through an access control entry, leave it here in one of our residential lobbies. There's also a crossing here that allows you to get out into the retail space so that if they're picking up, they can pick up the retail space here. So it is a natural place for rideshare pickup and drop off. There is a bike storage facility directly adjacent the entry on West Broad Street, which is the closest location to the WNOD trail as well. This will be for the public. So people who want to visit the site, who want to shop at the retail, they have very convenient secured bike storage right here off of Broad Street. We are also evaluating a potential bike share location with the city. That is not defined yet because candidly, there may be too many bike shares here. So we need to look into if this is actually a viable option or not. Here's a rendering that shows some of these elements at this intersection with the bollards. You can't see mirrors in here. Don't block the box signage. And then the bike storage facility right off. And then again, WNOD trail is slightly down here as well. You can also get, as I'll transition into here, kind of a view of the wide sidewalks that we are proposing. That's a big, again, pedestrian safety. Now, here's been a big point of conversation, which is pedestrian and bicycle connection along the western face of the building. One thing that I did bring up last week is that, you know, there are physical constraints on that side of the building associated with the building and the infrastructure that make it impossible for us or make it rather extremely difficult for us to create a completely through pedestrian crossing. And talking with staff, one of the things that we are able to commit to is providing essentially 2/3 of that crossing as an access easement. And then with the goal of one day working with the neighboring property owner to continue the last third down here. So we will not be building here. This will have the ability in the future to provide a full connection if it's so deemed needed and reasonable. But again, building geometry and infrastructure makes that extraordinarily difficult. This is an exhibit showing outdoor seating. I think there's been some concerns that essentially this whole thing is going to be outdoor seating. It is not. That's not how the retail would work. I can't tell you definitively that would be there, and there. But plus or minus, if you're looking at just total outdoor seating, ignoring the plaza, you know, you're looking at little sections along Broad Street. This is very technical, but long and short, as we're talking about pedestrian safety around the site, we talk a lot about vehicular safety. I really think the streetscape improvements here are substantial. They make a material impact on being able to navigate around the site for the citizens of the city. The existing sidewalks are at best 6 feet in pedestrian zone on Broad Street. At worst, what we're proposing is a 6-foot minimum pedestrian zone, and that's only in the situation where you have your streetscape elements plus your outdoor dining, which, as I showed here, is not throughout the entire West Broad facade. Where there isn't outdoor dining, you have 13 feet, and where there is an outdoor dining or a tree pit, you have 20 feet. So, sorry, I have a visual representation of that as well. Meanwhile, on West Street, right now you have 5-foot sidewalks that include impediments such as utility poles. Because we're going to be undergrounding utility poles, we're proposing 9-foot clear pedestrian zones without impediments. So again, substantial improvements to those pedestrian safety around the building. And you've seen this exhibit as well, which kind of details that as well. On Ellison Street, you're going from a 3-foot sidewalk with obstructions to a 6-foot clear sidewalk. So visually, how does that look? When you have your outdoor dining and your streetscape, you've got the 6-foot zone, which again is what you have today, but in a much nicer, more comfortable setting. When you don't have that, as I showed you in that previous rendering with the bike storage, you have 13 to 20 feet clear, which again will provide significantly improved pedestrian access in and around this property. Environment now, transferring from traffic for transportation to environment, there has been a focus on increased ground floor open space. Again, I'll harken back to what I mentioned last week. We took a big swing with the second submission. We lopped off an entire story. We carved out open space throughout the project. That second submission was that was the major step. We've been trying to create that incremental improvements or even substantial improvements depending on what the area is. Ground floor open space, we believe we have maximized to the best of our ability today. On the ground floor, almost 20% of the space is open. When you include above grade open space, 30% of the footprint of the building is open space today. Is open space from what we're proposing. Increased tree canopy coverage, again, an element where we've been trying to find that incremental growth. You can see where the canopy coverage is. It's about 11.5% canopy coverage compared to 7.5% at phase 1. We've looked at trying to double stack tree linings along Ellison Street just to get more trees in. Issue there is because we're undergrounding all the utilities, we have wet utilities down here, there's just no way we can get more trees. In fact, that's why we couldn't get another tree here as well. It's because there's so many utility lines over here. So the reality is we've got trees in the plaza, and we've heard from people, well, we'd rather not have landscaping, we'd rather have more seating in the plaza. It's a delicate balance, but we have exceeded what we did at phase 1. We believe we've maximized coverage around the building. 2 other comments on environment: increased use of green infrastructure and reduction of heat island, and the submittal of the lead scorecard with any future site plan submittal, with an emphasis on energy reduction. From a stormwater perspective, we are proposing a 20% reduction over the 10-year runoff rate, a $20,000 commitment to the stormwater fund. From green infrastructure, we've got bioretention planters along Ellison Street, which you can kind of see along the backside of this rendering here, along with 2 green roofs that were shown on that open space plan. From a heat island impact, the 31% open area significantly helps with the heat island impact. That's the landscaping along Ellison Street, within the plaza, along the western facade, and the incorporation of a white roof TPO membrane that reflects light rather than absorbs it helps with the heat island impact as well. From a LEED perspective, in the voluntary concessions, we have committed to a submittal, a LEED scorecard submittal that demonstrates those energy savings at site plan submission. It should be noted that, that's a design item, right? That'll just say the design meets the criteria. In order for us to get occupancy, we need to actually meet the criteria. Well, we have to post a bond, and we lose that bond if we don't meet the criteria. So there are multiple checks and balances to ensure that gets hit. Architecture was not an item on that list, but it's something that came up. There was an AAB meeting. We were not able to meet at that, but I did want to show you, and again, architecture is absolutely something that evolves throughout site plan. So this is not done, but we do want to show kind of some before and afters as to where we've gone before to today. So this is West Broad Street before, this is today. Essentially the biggest thing is just we've enlarged the garage opening for the left turn movements as we talked about before. This is the other side of West Broad old. Today, we've wrapped the 4 bays with L-shaped elements, which is a more contemporary element. It provides a visual relief. So that's a differentiator, because that's been one of our big things, right? Is complementing phase 1 while also differentiating itself as well. The corner architecture, we've got a lighter color for a softer approach and a focus on quality materials such as masonry and metal panel. When you come down West Street in the plaza, we've added a bay here to create a vertical break and adjust the perceived roof line as well. No big changes as you come further down West Street. Same with at the corner, no big changes here as well. Ellison Street, we have done some we've added some new materials and layers of materials to try to create a more contemporary facade and organization, and also to help differentiate a little bit more from phase 1. This is already going to be differentiated from phase 1 because of things like stoops and balconies in the front lawns. But again, just trying to place an emphasis on higher quality materials, and I'll actually touch on that in a second. One thing that's also been asked is context renderings. How does this look in context with phase 1 and some of the surrounding projects? I think this is a good view of coming north on West Street, north on Southwest Street. phase 2 on the left, phase 1 to the north. And same here, coming east on Broad Street. You got, phase 2 here, and the West Falls Plaza is right before you get to, and then phase 1 moving forward. So again, you can see how these buildings relate to each other, while we're also going to try to differentiate them as well. And here's a context as well that speaks to how we are trying to create the residential element along the side, while framing the contemporary elements and the commercial elements along Broad Street to complement phase 1. So there will be a continued focus on quality materials, differentiating the facades, and refining all of this through the site plan process. One of the things we include in the memo that I do want to publicly state is, if it's amenable to Planning Commission and the AAB, we would like to have a joint work session. My architect is on this call. They are taking copious notes. But since we weren't able to make that prior meeting, if we were to just have a joint work session, I think that might be incredibly productive prior to our third submission. Last few slides, I promise. Retail, this is just reiterating, again, things that we've talked about before. 50% of the total retail, or rather 50%, of the total retail will be designated for restaurant or food and beverage use. And the co-working space will be available to Falls Church residents on a membership basis. Plus, we will have a conference room in there that's available free of charge, just reservations for civic associations. Art is a new element that we've added to the VCs. This was in conjunction with conversations we've had with Arts and Humanities Councils and neighbors and other groups. Essentially, we want that Founders Plaza to be anchored by a central interactive art element. And we see that playing out through a process that isn't entirely dissimilar to how the mural at phase 1, which I think turned out very well, played out as a site plan amendment. Rather than rush it through during site plan, let's really create an interesting, cohesive process that involves Planning Commission, Arts and Humanities, and the school system, where you can bring in kids to work with an artist and figure out what is this piece that can draw people in to the Founders Plaza and really activate this space. The general programming and layout and seating of Founders Plaza, again, continues to be under evaluation. That will progress through site plan as well, in conversations with neighbors, different materials, different types of seating, etc. So that is evolving as well. Last piece before I wrap up here, Mr. Krasner had wrapped up last time by saying, we really want to tie this back to the special exception criteria. So I very briefly do want to run through the criteria and just mention how this project does meet that criteria. So the first off is conformance to the comp plan and small area plans. The staff report does, confirm that it does to the downtown small area plan. The development provides for significant new or renovated commercial spaces. Again, the existing use is technically 25,000 square feet. I think we would all agree that most of that is warehouse space, or at least, a good amount of that is warehouse space. We're proposing 25,000 square feet net of new Class A commercial, plus the 280 residential units. The resulting development produces positive net new commercial and residential revenue. The existing revenue, which is from 2014, frankly, when this was peak operation, was $60,000 a year. The proposed revenue is $1.6 million, with a proposed net impact of $210,000 a year. Compatibility with surrounding land uses. Again, we try to provide those renderings to provide context for that, along with what we've said from the beginning, the treatment along Ellison Street for a more residential context. Second piece here is about expanding community facilities. It's essentially about your voluntary concessions, if you will. So, we've talked about this ad nauseum. The total value of the VC package is in excess of $11.5 million today. The development provides affordable housing. We proposed 12% of our homes as affordable housing, which is double what we did at phase 1. A vibrant pedestrian-oriented environment. Again, we walk through those streetscape improvements around the project that I think significantly improve the pedestrian environment. Creative use of landscaping, open spaces, green infrastructure. We've talked about environmental. We've talked about the Founders Plaza. We've talked about the 31% open space, where we're really trying to maximize that in the tree canopy to the best of our ability. Encourages local or independent businesses. We've placed an emphasis from the beginning on the retail merchandising plan, being supportive of neighborhood serving retail. Generally speaking, those end up being a lot of local and independent businesses. This is reduction of parking. We've proposed that 22% reduction of parking plus the TDM plan and the set-asides for car sharing and ride share. Encouraging multimodal transportation. Again, what I just mentioned, we will have public bike storage and we will have a covered bus shelter on Broad Street. The LEED program, again, we've mentioned that as well, the LEED Gold plus the 20% energy improvement. Try to get through that quickly because I know you've had a long meeting. But that wraps up, I think, again, my goal here was to address the stated concerns in the staff report from last time. None of this is new per se. It is visually represented for the first time. I'm happy to answer any questions with the understanding that this is just another step in this process as this project continues to evolve.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muffler, for that presentation. That was very helpful to see where things are at, where they were and where they are today. I'll open it up to commissioners for questions for the applicant and/or staff. Who wants to start off? Being uncharacteristically quiet, maybe because it's been somewhat of a long evening already. But all right, there we go. I know this is not a shy group typically. Mr. Stevens, I think you were first out of the gate. Go ahead.
Okay, I don't really have any questions, but I could certainly make some comments if that's appropriate now, or I can defer to Mr. Fuentes if he has questions.
I mean, I think it's questions, comments. I mean, I think, again, it's either way, it's fine.
Okay. I would also add to your list of the environmental pluses the fact that I think you're planning an all-electric building as far as the appliances in the units go. And
correct.
Yeah, that's also a positive. As the grid gets cleaner, it does allow for a downward trend on emissions, which would not be the case if natural gas were being used in the unit. So I'll mention that. Overall, I mean, I think you've kind of laid this out well, and as our chairman has pointed out, our North Star is the comprehensive plan and small area plans, and this certainly, by and large, as far as I can determine, is consistent with both the spirit and the details of what's there. There are two areas that do kind of continue to concern me, and this would be more by way of consideration for, I don't want to say advice, but just sharing our thoughts with the city council as they deliberate on the second reading of this. Certainly neither of these are going to be things that they won't already be considering, but it might be helpful if they hear these from us as well. One has to do with the what I'm calling the sequencing, or how we can how the city with the staff issues that it has contemplate handling a number of large projects all at the same time. And we know that the West Falls, as well as the Broad and Washington projects, are going to be launching probably early next year. There's the One City Center that's under contemplation. So, these are all huge, complicated projects, and it just, kind of makes me wonder, on a small city of our size, how many of these we can handle at the same time, so that, encouraging our city council to think about ways to sequence the construction to achieve a better fit within the resources that we have in the city, just seems to me as something that we should say. The second item has to do with this whole issue that we've seen with Founders Row 1, with the delivery of that project with boarded up windows on the retail sites. And that's certainly not something we want to see happen again. And so I think if there's a way that we can encourage council to look for ways to look for some conditions that can avoid the delivery of the completed project without boarded up retail spaces. So those would be two things that perhaps I might suggest that we add into whatever resolution that we adopt. But overall, I'm very positively disposed towards this project. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Stevens. And if I may, the boarded up storefronts, again, we're not well served by either. Those will be starting to cover, if not this week, first thing next week. But your point is well taken.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Weiss, I think you were next.
Yeah, I also want to thank you for the updated presentation materials and the memo and the summary of how this project is evolving. It's very helpful to see it. A couple comments and then 2 questions. One, it really, maybe belatedly sank in with me just how challenging getting to Broad Street westbound will be, or have the patience, not challenging, but the patience that will be required of drivers. And so I'll leave that consideration to, those in the Planning Commission who are more well-versed in transportation issues than me, but that will be a challenge. And I could see that being a concern to any pedestrian walking by. The second comment is our prior applicant mentioned that the infrastructure bill might include some funding for additional electric vehicle or payment for additional electric vehicle spaces. So if staff hears anything from the prior applicant, it would be great to pass that information along so that other developments like this one can benefit from that knowledge if you're not already following that, which you might very well be. The question that I have is, I was pleased to see the 2/3 right of way for the walkway between this building and the next site. And I'm also mindful that there was a public comment about wanting that pedestrian walkway for safe access to Broad Street. I don't fully understand the 2/3. Can you just tell me a little bit more? I guess after this building is built, and assuming that the current site stays the way it is, will pedestrians be able to get all the way through?
They will not. Well, I'd have to see what the topography is on that. I mean, technically speaking, they would be walking onto the plaza parking lot, which I think is what many of them do today, right? So then it's a matter of, is there the availability of the connection? That's a great question. I don't know why I've never thought of that. So thank you for bringing that up. I'll have to look into that and just follow up with you. The logic on that is essentially that if and when that project does come up for development, staff would be pursuing them to follow through on the rest of that 1/3 to create the remaining access point. But perhaps there is a way today of doing that. I need to look in that from a couple different angles.
Okay, yeah, it'd be great to follow up on that, because if there's effectively a way for folks to get through, that would be great. If not, if it's just a blocked alleyway, I don't know, I guess I would have are there safety concerns, So it'd be good to know more about that. And then my last question was, did I see that you're counting the green roof as part of the open space?
Yes.
Okay, and I guess a follow-up question for staff is that a typical way to calculate open space?
Yeah, there are a couple definitions of open space, and I've been looking into what other jurisdictions do, and I think often they talk about sort of space that's open to the sky. And so those spaces that are not, and so there's often a distinction between sort of open space, which would include everything, versus ground floor open space. So I think the way this is broken out in terms of ground floor accessible versus total, I think is a fair way to do that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Puentes, you're up next. Oh, you're muted.
Figure it out one of these days. I agree with my fellow commissioners. I think this project has a lot to offer, especially given the way Mr. Stevens framed it around the goals of the comp plan and the small area plan. I'm really happy to see the way you framed all this also around these pedestrian and safety improvements. I mean, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that the area is now hostile to pedestrians and folks who aren't in cars. And so that's going to be a dramatic, I think, improvement in that neighborhood. I do have a question that Ms. Weiss was kind of brought up about the cut, the median cut, and that left turn. During the applicant's presentation, you mentioned it. You said that it is a traffic calming measure. Just give me a little more background. I think it's in there to appease the neighbors who don't want cars on the backside of the development. What's the traffic calming element of allowing cars to make a left turn there?
Yeah, no, it's essentially a relief valve for traffic on West Street. That's the best way of framing it. So it's reducing traffic flow on West Street, because without that ability today, the only way for someone that's in Founders 2 to get to Broad Street would be to make a left turn out of the garage onto West Street, go to the light, make a left turn onto Broad Street. So now you've got no ability to get to Broad Street from this project, which is problematic. So by allowing for that left turn movement, you've created that alternative use. You've reduced the quantity of traffic at that light. And that light, frankly, is what stems all of the traffic issues on West Street. You solve that light along with the traffic calming that we've talked about, the crosswalks, et cetera. But you solve that light, you solve a lot of the issues. It's the light and the speed. Sorry, those are the two things, right? If you can reduce the speed and you can solve the light, and that median break is the relief valve, which allows for people to make that access onto Broad Street.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. I think that reducing the speed is certainly the best way to make it safer, and allowing and providing a whole lot of places for cars to come in and out, I think increases the speeds of the cars. So I think there's a little bit of a disconnect, and I don't really support the addition of that median brake. I don't see how it makes it safer. I think it makes it better for cars to be moving through, and I don't care at all about the level of service for that intersection. And there's so many good pedestrian elements in here, and that one just puzzles me. The other one is the other one Mrs. Weiss brought up about the west access. Again, just such a shame if we can't figure out a way to make that go all the way through, because again, there's so many other great elements in here. But look, I think it's a great project. For all the reasons that I mentioned, the VCs are great. The commitment to affordable housing we haven't brought up. It's very strong for this project. The public art piece that you mentioned is very good. Just for my commissioners, I don't know about the EV money, the electric vehicle money that's in the infrastructure bill. It's going to take a while, I think, to get out, but it's probably going to go more to rural and disadvantaged communities. I don't know how well Falls Church is going to be positioned to get some of that, but it's certainly something we should watch. But I wouldn't hold it up. I wouldn't hold up these projects for what's going on the federal level. But anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fuentes. Let's see, I think Mr. Hyra was next.
All right, Mr. Muffler, thank you for the presentation. It was definitely great to hear all the upgrades on the sidewalk and the traffic calming. And one of the things I really liked is the way you presented and talked about sort of the integration and differentiation between Founders Row 1 and 2. And my question is related to that in terms of the retail. Because, you mentioned the co-working space, but you didn't really talk about sort of the philosophy behind the retail in phase 2 and how that is different and complements what you're expecting to see in phase 1. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, sort of the philosophy, rationale, and thoughts about the retail for phase 2 and how that connects to what you think you're going to ultimately get in phase 1.
Yeah, no, and it's a great question. It's one we've tried to talk about as openly as possible, and that's why I bring up the merchandising plan, because I think it helps visually represent it. But in a nutshell, right, the thesis here is phase 1, lifestyle entertainment retail, phase 2, neighborhood serving retail. That may sound like a fine line, but if you think about it visually, phase 1, it's the movie theater, it's the fancy restaurants, it's where you go on a date night, right? It's where you go out for a nice dinner. Phase 2 is where you go any day of the week to pick up a good, to go to a bakery or a neighborhood coffee shop or convenience mart or pharmacy. That's the way we have tried to merchandise this. Again, it will be heavy on food and beverage, so you're gonna have restaurants here just like you have restaurants across the street. But the focus on across the street, think about across the street as being Mosaic, and think about this as being more Dunmoring. I only say that because we did both of those projects, right? But one is very much lifestyle entertainment, and one is very much just like kind of your practical everyday stuff. That's not to say that it won't be like sexy. I've gotten in trouble by saying oh, it's going to be a bunch of dry cleaners. It's not going to be that. That's not what this is going to be. But I think there's space in a city like this for both to have complementary retail And the reality is some of it will be redundant. You know, you might have a really nice restaurant here and a really nice restaurant across the street. I don't know what the retail is going to be per se 4 or 5 years from now. Everything could be Amazon, who knows? But this is the goal. This is the way we are approaching it, underwriting it, merchandising it. So anyways, sorry, that's the philosophy of it all.
All right. And tell me a little bit more. I mean, you said with the co-working space that residents would be able to buy a membership. But who do you expect that's who's going to be there? If Falls Church residents, or are you expecting some other people to be there? And also, who's going to? I mean, this is not going to be WeWork. So who manages this type of space, or who's the retailer?
So so a couple things there. I have proffered that this would be available for Falls Church residents, so it's a city benefit, amenity that they're getting. You all have challenged me to say, just open it up. Just open it up. Maybe you bring in people from out of town that helps. So I'm happy to do that, frankly. So that's just one point. Second point is it's 5,000 square feet, which is large, but it's not, to your point, it's not WeWork. This is not an office building. It will be designed as a WeWork-ish type space, as a co-work space. This is not going to be Regis where it's executive offices or anything like that, right? Different environments, different collaborative ways of using this. But, you know, the memberships aren't going to, this is not going to be hundreds of members. You know, we will have a maximum amount of here. We will be able to operate this because it is both a building amenity along with a city amenity. So we'll be able to run it from that perspective. I think personally that there are a lot of people in the city and surrounding jurisdictions that, you know, are going to get tired of working from home. I know people are going to probably start going back to the office here next year, but a lot of people aren't, or they're not going to go back all the time. And if we build this right, this is just another amenity for the city, right? It's another promotional item. It's another new way of approaching commercial that maybe, you know, could play out even bigger moving forward.
All right, great. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Teets.
So I guess this is a point of being number 5 that a lot of things I had written down has already come up, because I was going to ask about the open space, because I love the green roofs, but I don't really consider it open space because it's not like usable space, but it's great to have green. And the pedestrian walkway kind of bothered me, and the retail is concerning just because, you know, we're still waiting for things to really open back up to see what we're going to get. And I guess I just want to go back, you know, when we came away from the last presentation we had, I was predisposed against this project. I felt like it was a little bit too big for the land. It didn't have enough benefits in terms of the retail and the office to offset the residential, because it is supposed to be mixed use. But I do like a lot of things you've done, and I think that the visuals were really good, and I get, you know, and I feel like the open space is a little bit stronger. It's just, I think it's come around to being a little bit better project than what I thought at the beginning. But we still are like, so we're basically, it's 15,000 square feet of retail now, even though you're correct. Part of that rug shop is like kind of a warehousey kind of workshop-y place. And so we're not really getting additional retail square footage per se.
It's just to be clear, it's 20,000 square feet of commercial. Right. So if you're just looking, you got the 5,000 square feet here, office or flex retail, plus your retail here. So 20,000 square feet. And then you've got 5,000 square feet from co-working, however you want to define that.
Well, no, I understand, because I know you have the office. I was going to say, that's what I was going to say next. And I know that you have, you know, the office space, and then you have the flex space. I mean, I guess the issue with the flex space is that it's not really like a taxable business. Like, you're not going to see, like, so my husband's a doctor, we own his practice, we pay business taxes. You're not really going to see that in that flex space. So when it's an amenity and it's really nice, and I agree with you. Like, I'm so tired of being at home that I went to my husband's practice, cleared out a supply room, and made myself an office in there because I just couldn't stand being home anymore. But so no, I totally get that. And I'm assuming, like, with this flex co-working space, like, it's something you're going to run like an app, like a hotel app, where people reserve a space like you do in a hotel. You reserve a space for a certain amount of time. Okay, so I can see how that's going to work. You know, I'm not so much worried about the transportation. I think it may add some more traffic, but as a you know, when you look at who's driving on West Street and Broad Street, the vast majority of it is pass-through traffic. So to me, anytime we can improve pedestrian ability to move around and it slows the traffic down, that's a good thing for us. We don't want to be the pace that people think they can pass through really fast anyway. So I'm good with that. I get the left turn. It's going to be interesting to see how it, you know, it's one of those things where I get it. I think it could work, but you kind of have to wait and see. I mean, we have that problem with the Flower Building where you're not allowed to take a left turn out of it. People do it all the time anyway. And so it'll be interesting to see how it works. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you for that feedback.
Thanks, Ms. Dietz. Ms. Comont, go ahead.
I just want to underline Ms. Teets's last point on the idea that we don't want people driving 30 miles an hour up West Street to cross Broad, because then they're just going to keep coming back and doing that. Maybe they'll find a different route if they have to drive more slowly through that area. So I do see a lot of benefits. I think that the improvements that you're making for pedestrians are really terrific. I'm a fan of opening up the co-working space to beyond the city's borders in the interest of attracting more patrons to your establishments. Maybe one way you could maintain a community benefit, it would be to offer discounted memberships to city residents. That's one idea. I understand that the memberships will be limited, but just feels a little weird. I think if you have this really nice looking co-working space to say you can't use this unless you live in the city, feels a little, I don't know, that just doesn't sit right with me. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Otherwise, I'm also disposed to liking this project.
No, that's good feedback. And one thing on the co-working I do want to emphasize again is that we will have a conference room there. So again, if it's Chamber of Commerce or Planning Commission, like if there's a meeting that needs to be had, it's not going to be able to fit 100 people. But for smaller meetings, they will be able to rent that out, and that will be for city use only. So
terrific, great, thank you.
Okay, again, a lot of what I might have commented on has been mentioned. I may, we'll see where we go after the public comment. I mean, I would just echo, there was a way to get that pedestrian connection along the west side. I mean, I think that certainly would be a plus. But I also do think that this, the improvements that you've made are significant. And I kind of would align myself with what Ms. Teets said, that earlier in the process I was much more hesitant. But I feel like the project has come a long way just in the time we've had it in front of us. And so I still have some concerns about the retail mix and the concern about, are we going to have nail salons at 7-Eleven and as opposed to something more significant? I mean, I like to hear the comparison to Dunloring. I think that would be something to strive for. But I'll save any additional comments maybe for the end. But overall, I mean, I'm pleased with the changes and how things have progressed and yeah, I'll leave it at that for the moment. So at this point, it is a public hearing, and we received a number of written comments, and I know that all the commissioners received that in their package and have gone through those. Ms. Bazemore, do we have any members of the public that wanted to testify?
Yes.
Directly?
Yes, we do. We have Mr. David Sedney of 1207 Ellison Street here to speak on Founders Road 2.
Okay, well, again, to anyone from the public, I appreciate your patience in sitting through a long meeting, but here we are. So here's your opportunity, and it's been a while since we've had a live public comment. My commissioners may have to remind me what our time limit is. If we give folks 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chair. In the past, it's been 3 minutes, and then sometimes there's been an allowance for 5 for folks who are identified as representing some larger organization.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So there we go. So we'll give you 3 minutes. So that's our standard. And Just please identify I think Ms. Bazemore just did, but just identify your name and address for the record and go ahead.
Yes, David Sedney, I live at 1207 Ellison Street, which is quite adjacent to the proposed project. And I first want to have to admit off the top that while I've lived here for 20-some years, most of the last 5 years I've been in Afghanistan, and I understand, looking at the record, that there was some public outreach. I wasn't here. I wasn't available for that public outreach, and so I'm coming at this as somebody who's just seeing it for the first time. And I'll echo what one of the commissioners said early in terms of the size and the overall impact on the traffic. Having lived here for a long time, but coming back and seeing the impact on traffic of the traffic light changes and the Founders Row 1 traffic, I think that cut through thing is something that is ridiculous. I think it's something that should be objected to. It will make traffic worse for almost everybody, and I think it would be a very big mistake for you all to approve that on that cut through thing. On the overall design, I saw you in your presentation. You talked about a townhouse-like approach. I'm not sure why it's not just townhouses. Right now, the thing is zone transitional. Why not make it townhouses? Have it transitional between an apartment and residential, and have a series of townhouses. We have right up the street on West Broad Street. We have a townhouse, a really upscale townhouse development that's right there across from the high school. And it's a very high quality place. It's really a good addition to the neighborhood. So it's not clear to me why this all has to be apartments, why it can't be townhouses rather than townhouse-like. The amount of open space and the issues of stormwater, I haven't had a chance to look carefully. I'm not an expert at this, but I'm very concerned. As I hope the people in the Planning Commission know, the cottages development that was built up on Railroad Avenue resulted in a huge stormwater problems that persist today, never been rectified. I expect that this will increase the stormwater issues in this area, and not just in this area, but also in the overall watershed of the area. The amount of erosion and trips run over the last 5 to 10 years has been huge, and my expectation is that this project will include it even further. But again, I haven't had a chance to look at that. But overall, and then finally a point, and I have to apologize to the developer, but everyone in this area thinks Founders Row 1 is just really very, very unattractive. The architecture is not welcoming. You come into Falls Church and you see this sort of big blank wall, this monolith that has really no architectural redeeming features whatsoever. It looks like you've tried to do a little bit better in the design of this, but if the Planning Commission, the Architectural Review Board should really take a look at this, and rather than trying to make it some kind of low-end thing like the canyons out of Dunloring, rather have it be someplace that's architecturally appealing, someplace that's a signature that makes people think Falls Church is a great place to come and visit. But anyway, I apologize. I was not able to be part of the earlier community outreach part, and I appreciate the fact that the developer did have community outreach, but those are some comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Bazemore, do we have other speakers?
No, we do not.
Okay. All right, well, then I will close the public hearing portion of the meeting. And now just bringing it back to the commission.
Mr. Chair, if I could, there is one raised hand in the Teams app.
God, I missed that. Mr. Duncan, I see your hand is raised. You are a member of the public, among other things. Did you want to?
I just put my hand up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted, as a neighbor to this site for the last 36 years, I just want to thank all of y'all on the Planning Commission for diving deeply into the details of the proposal and playing an already very important role in improving it. And I look forward to your further comments as they make their way through the City Council, and also look forward to engaging with the community further. I know that Joe, I think, has got another neighbors meeting scheduled for tomorrow, if I'm not right, about the Founders Row 1 development. So any interested citizens might want to tune into that, and I'm sure he would be available to send you the link to that if they ask. So thank you for letting me put my 2 cents in.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and we appreciate you, sitting in on a lot of our meetings. And I know you don't always speak up, but you're listening to a lot of our meetings, and we appreciate the interaction with council and good. All right. Well, okay. So again, that brings it back to the commission, and I'll be honest. I chatted with Mr. Stoddard, earlier today and last week, and initially, there was talk about, we were going to be ready to take an action tonight. There was some talk about the schedule potentially allowing for, a couple more weeks before, it's going to city council in mid-December. We have another meeting on December 1st. I know Mr. Muffler has some calendar conflicts, apparently, but I guess I was trying to take the temperature of the commission tonight and listen to hear where people are at. If people feel that they're ready to deliberate and try to put together a recommendation and a motion tonight, or is there any merit to taking more time? I don't know. Based on the comments I heard from folks, I mean, I didn't hear a lot of, at least at this point in time, outstanding questions or requests from the commission to the applicant. So, I'm interested to hear. I kind of want to open up for discussion and hear if folks feel we're ready to go ahead, or if there's any need or merit in taking a couple more weeks and then having a final, making a final decision or a final recommendation on December 1st. So, does anyone have, are people prepared to act tonight? Kind of looking to take everyone's temperature on that. How about this? Anyone not ready to act tonight? Let's try the other one. Anyone not ready to act on this tonight, or feels that there's sort of additional information they need before they feel comfortable to proceed? I'm not hearing anybody say that. So, Mr. Stoddard, I know we chatted earlier, and again, if the commission feels that we're ready, and then I think that that we should let the consensus prevail, and we can go forward. So with that, then I guess we'd be looking to take up a motion and put together our recommendation here on this. Let's see. There's I'm sure everyone's had a chance to review staff's draft, and so who is I would look for someone who's ready to take that on, and we can then deliberate on exactly what we want to do with it, as far as any changes or edits to that. So, okay, Mr. Puentes, was your hand up? Now it's down. So,
yeah, I can make the motion.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, I'll start with the rezoning, I guess, just to. Whereas an application for an official zoning map change to amend the map from T1 transitional to B1 limited business district has been submitted by the applicant pursuant to section 4885 in conformance with the procedure set forth in section 4886 of the city code, and city council approval is required as a prerequisite for the special exception. And whereas at its regular meeting on September 27, 2021, the council formally referred the rezoning application to the Planning Commission for its review and recommendation. And whereas the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project is generally consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and West Broad Street small area plan, which includes the following as key concepts: use respectful building design, development, West Broad Street as a great street, and create connections and develop activity nodes. And now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of T021-08 to City Council.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? See, Mr.
I can second.
Okay, well, second for discussion there, and then we'll, Mr. Stevens, go ahead. If your hand was up. Did you have something more to add, or were you just raising it the second? No? Okay. Mr. Pointer, did you read? I apologize. I kind of blanked out for a second. Did you read the rezoning and the special exception, or was that just the rezoning?
I thought we do them separately. I just did the rezoning.
Yeah. Right. So and we should do it separately. They're two separate actions, and we should do the rezoning right first. So we have a motion and we have a second on the rezoning, which is the area, the 0.98 to go from T1 to B1, and again, it's subject to the voluntary concession. So, is there any discussion on that? Any discussions on the motion or the voluntary concessions? Any recommendations in there people wanted to see or not? Okay, I'm not hearing any.
I'll just say one thing that I did want to say. A couple of commissioners did bring it up, was that west side pedestrian access issue. Again, I think the applicant mentioned that there might be something that we can do. I don't know how to incorporate it into the action here tonight, but I really would love, and I think a couple of the commissioners would like that to take a closer look and see if there's anything we can do.
I would agree with you on that. I'd be happy to suggest a friendly amendment or second that if you're making an amendment, to second that and or just echo that, because I think that would be great if we could do that. I understand, that the site is tight, but it would seem that if there was any way to allow it, I think it would really help with connectivity. Right now, people have a pretty circuitous route who live back off Ellison and those streets beyond to get out to Broad Street, and this would provide a great way to help with that. So I would agree with that. Does the seconder, Mr. Stevens, do you accept that?
I do.
Okay. Mr. Howard, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's just one thing. It's not related to this project per se, but it's just something for like food for thought for all of us on the Planning Commission and staff for the city and city council members, and just we are seeing a lot of development come through. We've had two big projects before us today. We will have more coming our way, and my comment is about our affordable housing. That it is great that in these projects we are getting voluntary concessions for changing zoning and doing special exceptions. But I think it's really important for us to think about the type of units that we are getting and the size of the units. We are approving some affordable housing at 40%, 60, 80% of the area median income, but most of these units are very small. They're studios, 1 bedrooms. I don't even know if there are any 2 bedrooms. They're definitely not any 3s. And when we think about affordable housing, it is great that we're opening up opportunities for low and moderate income people and middle income people to have an opportunity to move to Falls Church with some of this housing. But when we really think about it, I mean, the gold and a lot of reason that a lot of us move to this community is getting access to the schools. And when we have such small affordable housing units in terms of the size, they're not really amenable to families. So it's really not giving people access to our incredible school system. And I just hope that as we think about the affordable housing going forward in our mixed use buildings, that we really do try to find a way to either use the contributions to build bigger or to undergird bigger units elsewhere in the city, or have it even within some of the units that pop up right on Broad. Because I think that's really important. And when we think about, I know there was a lot of concern that there would be overcrowding in the schools, but if you look at our schools and you look at the size of the younger kindergarten, first, second, I mean, it's smaller than what we have in the higher level grade levels. So I think this is a time where we need to think about building affordable housing that can accommodate families so that their kids have access to our schools. And again, I'm not, signaling this development per se, but I want to put this development and all the developments we have going forward into context, because we are really not building affordable housing that can accommodate families that can then get access to our schools. And I think that's the benefit of our community. And I really hope that we do try to find a way to preserve and build affordable housing that can have families that have kids that can get access to our public schools. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Hara. Okay. Any other comments or discussion points from the commission? Ms. Weiss.
I'm sorry, maybe it's the hour, but I'm just confused about where we are in the process. Mr. Puentes read the zoning motion, and there was a second. The voluntary concessions relate to the special exception, right? I
misspoke. That was I apologize.
Okay.
It's late hour. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Those are attached to the special exception.
Okay.
I apologize for confusing everybody. I realized that like 2 seconds after I said it.
I'm confusing everybody too, but
Okay.
that's all right.
So are we going to discuss the zoning motion and then vote on it and then discuss the special exception motion and then vote on it? Is that what the plan is?
It's two separate actions. That's right. I mean, a lot of the issues are interrelated, but yeah, we're gonna vote on them separately. So right now we're discussing the rezoning motion to rezone the portion of the property that's T1 to B1. So correct. And then the next one would be the special exception for the residential use and the height and the voluntary concessions, which are attached to those.
Okay, and there has been no proposed amendment to the zoning motion yet, right?
Only change was a recommendation from Mr. Puentes to recommend that the applicant provide a pedestrian connection across the western along the western property line.
Okay, right, and that goes with zoning and not special exception, or does it matter?
I think it could go with either or both.
Okay.
As far as that goes, I mean, it's. I think it could go with both. It's crossing that. I think part of the area that is the T1 now that's going to B1 would be included in that. So I think it's fine to mention it. We can mention it in both motions if we want to really underscore it. So I think that's fine. So, okay. So on the rezoning piece, all right, there are not any additional comments. I mean, I'll just say again that I feel that the rezoning itself is entirely, it's in the motion, but it's entirely consistent with the comprehensive plan, with the small area plan. And in that respect, the rezoning to B1 I feel the applicants met the standards and it's appropriate to support and recommend that rezoning. So, okay, so I think that's it. And Ms. Bazemore, then would you please call the roll on that motion?
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Teets? Ms. Teets?
Yes. Sorry, I had a problem with the mute button. Yes.
No worries. Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Weiss?
Yes.
Ms. Comont?
Yes.
Mr. Hira?
Yes.
All right. So that motion passes. All right, Mr. Puentes, are you going to take up the special exception motion? Oh, you're muted.
Yep, I can do that. So this one is longer. I propose a motion, whereas an application for a special exception to allow residential uses within a business district in a mixed-use development project and a special exception for a height bonus have been submitted by Mill Creek Residential Trust, LLC, the applicant, pursuant to section 48.488.2 in conformance with the procedure set forth in section 4890 of the city code. And whereas at its regular meeting on September 27, 2021, the council formally referred the special exception to the Planning Commission for its review and recommendation. And whereas the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project as amended by the applicant's revised materials is generally consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and Broad Street small area plan, and substantially achieves the goals of the comprehensive plan by providing a mixture of commercial use with retail frontages along Broad Street, parcel consolidation, and pedestrian-oriented design. And whereas the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project as amended by the applicant's revised materials largely satisfies the primary and secondary criteria in the zoning code for consideration of special exception applications, including conformance with the comprehensive plan and small area plan, new commercial space with a mix of commercial and residential uses, net new revenue to the city, and other community benefits. And whereas TO 21-08, which is concurrently under consideration by City Council, includes an ordinance for the rezoning of approximately 0.98 acres of land from T1 transitional to B1 limited business, which will allow for the consideration of building height of up to 85 feet with a special exception granted by City Council. And whereas the process outlined in the zoning code for the special exception and site plan allows for further refinement of specific project elements during the site plan. Now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of TR 21-06 to City Council.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Mrs. Teets seconds. Thank you very much. Discussion, Mr. Stevens, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest two amendments. First is that we encourage council to consider. I'm sorry. Oh, there's just some noise. We encourage council to consider ways to sequence construction to fit within the capacity of city staff capabilities, while multiple larger projects are also under development. And the second one is that we encourage council to adopt conditions that avoid delivery of the completed project with boarded up retail spaces.
I'll accept those amendments.
Okay. And I noted those, that staff get those, Mr. Stoddard, Mr. Holland. Did you get those amendments?
Yes, one about sequencing construction given staff capacity, and then the other was including, I guess, requirements that retail not deliver sort of boarded up spaces.
Right. Okay, Ms. Weiss.
Just to clarify, I think we had a first on the friendly amendment. I think we just need a second.
Oh, second.
You're right. I got confused. Mr. Stevens in second. Thank you, Ms. Dietz. That's the seconder accepts it too. All right. So that's added. Ms. Weiss, go ahead.
I don't have a nicely worded amendment, but I know a few of us expressed some concerns about that left turn lane out of Broad Street going towards West Broad. And maybe Mr. Puentes has some elegant thoughts about how to word amendment, but I guess I'd like to see some, and I recognize this will continue to be discussed in site plan, but I think just expressing the sentiment that we were concerned about the left turnings and being done safely for pedestrians. I'd like that kind of sentiment included. I don't know what you think, Mr. Puentes.
No, I would agree with that too. I don't know if all the commissioners did. I think a couple of commissioners made comments that they actually preferred that in there. So I just don't understand it, quite frankly. I don't know if there is a net traffic calming benefit to putting that in there. Looking through the engineering submissions, and I mean, I just don't understand what the benefit ultimately would be. I'm happy to wait till site plan to talk about it. But I don't know if we'll get consensus on that here.
Well, let's see. I mean, it's I don't know how other folks feel. I mean, I agree. I think the problem of the medium break is I mean, there'll be times a day where I suppose, early mornings, late in the evening where the volumes are light enough and the pedestrian traffic's not heavy, and you can see how there'd be some, I don't know, convenience, I guess, to allow folks to be able to make that movement. I think most of the day, it's going to be very, very difficult for folks to do it. I mean, if you think about right now, people try to make a left out of the shopping center just to the west, which is technically you're allowed to make a left out of there, and every once in a while a brave person will try to do that, and there you have that opposing left middle lane. You can kind of go halfway out, but it's you really can't do it well. It's dangerous. In this situation, even with like the curb and the median cut, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to wait for folks to allow you to kind of creep out, and it would be sort of an awkward thing. I don't know, like operationally, again, what it does to the trip generation. I understand, there's talk about what it does to the signal. It keeps people from going through that signal, takes some of those trips away from the signal and gets them, where they want to go if you're trying to go westbound. I don't know. I don't know if without further study of that, if we'll be able to. If I can strongly recommend it, one way or the other, without being shown that there's real merit in that, because I think what we sacrifice, on the other end of it is not insignificant. So that's kind of my 2 cents. I don't know. We can see. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts. If they do, people should speak up. But Mr. Hyra, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, my comment was, or just my question is for Mr. Stevens. Like, I agree with your amendments, but I'm just curious, kind of the first one about proper sequencing due to staff capacity. Yeah, we're a small town, right? And we don't have a huge staff. They can get overworked. But I'm curious kind of what you're thinking. Is it slow down the development? And the reason I say this is that money is cheap right now. So we're going to get a lot of proposals. If interest rates start rising, the likelihood of the pace of development that we've seen will decrease. So tell me what undergirds your amendment and what you're trying to accomplish.
I think it's mainly wanting to see the rollout of these projects to succeed. And it certainly is possible if you kind of overlap too many of them at the same time, that things may get missed. And that could result in a lot of backlash from the community. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really more a quality control matter more than anything else. And obviously, I sitting here or us sitting here, we don't know exactly what that pace needs to be. So there has to be collaboration. But I think my thought was just to highlight the issue that this really could be a problem if we don't think about it and incorporate the sequencing into the planning process.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that helps.
No, that definitely helps. Thanks.
Okay. I mean, just my 2 cents on that is that to some extent, right? It's it's hard. It's not always possible for the local for government to kind of meter the flow, so to speak. At least not in a very formal way. Sort of informally, and sometimes by default, that they don't have the staff capacity. Things are forced to slow down, which isn't always a good thing. The other side of the coin would be, council considering, do we have the staff capacity? If not, maybe they need some additional human capital, in the department and in the various departments to work on some of this stuff. And so that's maybe a discussion for council to chew on. But we could certainly put them on notice. I think it's fair for us to put them on notice that there are repercussions about having all these things come online at the same time. Maybe it's a good problem to have, but it can be, it's certainly something they should be cognizant of at budget time. I'm sure Mr. Stoddard has opinions on that, but I don't know, as a planning commission, I don't know how much we can sort of dictate that other than to just kind of put them on notice that, in case you hadn't noticed, there's a lot of these significant projects coming through and staff's going to need to work on them. And if there's not enough time in the day or staff on the payroll to get it done efficiently, that may cause various problems and issues, and developers may start getting cranky too. So, but yeah, I think it's fair to point it out. I don't think there's any harm in us kind of putting it out there as something they should try to think about. I don't know how much they can fit it into a particular approval, as far as timing or anything like that. But it's fair for us to just put it in there as something we're noting.
Yeah, can I just make a comment on that regardless of our staff capacity, there're just things in the market that we just don't know. I mean, I think that if it's residential, no matter what it is, I mean, we may like it or not like it, but financially it's likely going to work where interest rates are and the demand for our town. But on the retail side, I mean, we just see this with Founders Row 1, right? I mean, what we thought we were going to get, and then we get the pandemic. Now that project doesn't look how we want it to look, but it isn't necessarily because of staff's capacity, right? It's market conditions. And Mr. Stevens, I would say that regardless of what our staff capacity is, I like your idea of kind of sequencing and thinking about our mixed use properties, because no real estate developer even knows where commercial development is going. As much as there's thought process around Founders Row 2, still, whatever is planned for now with the commercial and retail, we have no idea what it's going to look like in 2 years. So the co-working space, that may not work financially. All those restaurants, who knows what, so it's just, I think as a city, we need to think through kind of mixed use, because we just can't keep approving these things when we don't know what we're going to get. And we're kind of seeing that the market has been disrupted by just seeing where Founders Row 1 is sitting right now. So anyway.
No, those are all good points, Mr. Hira. And you're hitting on some kind of inherent uncertainties, in the whole process. I mean, bigger discussions than probably for tonight. We could probably you could probably teach a whole course on, how difficult it is and going through this process and government, planning, trying to put too much prescriptive restrictions and regulation on the market. All those comments are very well taken. Bringing it back to this discussion, I think that, the best we can do is take what's presented to us. The private sector has come to us, this applicant, this developer with certain proposals, and we have to kind of take it at face value and evaluate it based on our plans, our ordinances, and make the best recommendations we can with the information that we have and the facts on the ground today, knowing that inherently it's fraught with uncertainty and unexpected things can and do happen. And when they do, we deal with the changes as they arise, as we've seen with Founders Row 1. But all good points and all well taken. Okay. So we have the motion on the floor. We have the second. We've made some amendments. Are there any other comments for commissioners or comments from commissioners? Mr. Fuentes. Read it again.
Every time. I just want to make sure, Ms. Weiss, we've addressed your concerns on the left turn. If you're okay waiting till site plan to address that, or
yeah, I guess that makes sense process wise.
Okay. So I'm not seeing any other hands come up for other comments. So I feel like at this point, we've gotten out there what we want, and overall, like I said, I'll just try to put not too much of a fine point on all of it, but I feel the project it's come a long way with us just in the few months we've worked on it. I think council's going to continue to work on some of this. I think the final sort of mix of retail, there's still some room to work on that. Even the amount of sort of professional office versus retail. I know there were the most recent changes to the conditions. We added some more flexibility, in the ground floor uses, and I was happy to see that. As far as enlivening the street, they're I think, restricting that much of it to professional office, could have been, too restrictive maybe. So I'm glad to see that. I think I know for sure council is going to continue to try to refine that and see if they can squeeze out, more retail. But as far as, we're concerned, I think they've come a long way. And from an urban design perspective, the project, is really improved. It will be a major improvement to that corner. It'll be a better environment for those in the neighborhood who walk. And I appreciate all the comments we got from neighbors on both pedestrian issues, vehicle issues. And I think, again, there's been a lot of attention paid to that. Some of that will continue to be refined at the site plan stage as well. But we appreciate all the comments that we received, the written comments that came in on this related to that. So with that, the hour's getting late. It's 10:28. Ms. Bazemore, if there's no other comments, let's get a roll call vote on the motion as amended.
Chair Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
Yes.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Ms. Weiss?
Yes.
Ms. Colmont?
Yes.
Mr. Hyra?
Yes.
All right, well, that motion passes. So, Mr. Muffler, thank you very much for your work with us to date. We will see you again. You still have a lot more work to go here in town, but we appreciate all that you've done with working with us, and we look forward to seeing this continue to transform. And good luck at City Council. And I know the other boards and commissions will have very valuable feedback for you. You mentioned having a joint meeting with the ARB on certain issues. I'll have to talk to Mr. Stoddard about how we might coordinate that, just procedurally. But if there's a way to make it work in a logical fashion, we're happy to provide additional feedback to help improve the project. But again, at this point, thank you and your team for all your work so far on this.
Thank you all very much. Have a great evening.
Okay, so it's 10:30, Mr. Stoddard. We're pretty much at the end of the agenda. I know we have a few more items, procedural items. We technically need a motion, right, to go beyond 10:30.
Correct.
So everyone knows that those who've been on the commission long enough know that this is always one of my pet peeves, but tonight, I think we did the best we could. And so I would look for a motion for a short, maybe 10 or 15-minute extension to allow us to just get through the final items on the agenda, if anyone would be so kind as to do that.
I move that we extend the meeting 15 minutes to get to the final items on our agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Dietz. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Weiss. Any discussion? Roll call vote, Ms. Bazemore?
Chair Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
Yes.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Ms. Weiss?
Yes.
Ms. Colmont?
Yes.
Mr. Hyra?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. All right, 15 minutes, and we will stick to that. Mr. Stoddard was very ambitious with the times he put on that agenda. I don't know where he got that from, but it's always good, I guess, to dream that we could have done it in 2 hours, but or not even. But anyhow, okay. So quickly moving on. Information items. Are there any brief planning commissioners' reports? I'm not hearing any. So that will take us to director's report. Mr. Stoddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, commissioners. I'll be brief without leaving anything out. The East End Small Area Plan, city staff did host a kickoff meeting. Many thanks to Columbia Baptist Church for hosting us once again for a small area plan meeting, held it on Saturday, November 6th. Well-attended meeting, a lot of community members there. We had full tables at all of our breakout group discussions. Everyone at the meeting got to talk about all the topics: vision and urban design, environment, open space and recreation, land use, height and density, transportation and connections. Attached to this report is the presentation that was provided as part of the meeting, as well as our notes, the notes we took on the flip charts as we facilitated the various conversations. This item is going to come before you as a work session item. This will be your kickoff with the small area planning process at your next regular meeting, which will be on Wednesday, December 1st. Second, Planning Commission annual service survey. So we started this a few years back. The idea is that staff wants to take the temperature of the planning commissioners on how good a job are we doing. Emily has crafted the survey this year. It looks similar to ones we've used in the past. It asks questions about, are the packages getting out in a timely fashion? Are the staff reports legible? Do they have the information that you all need to make informed discussions and decisions? And then some questions about the pace of how quickly staff is moving through work items. So that's available for you to take, and we would ask that you return those quickly so that we can have those results tallied in time for your advance, which is scheduled for your second December meeting on December 15th. Let's see, grant applications. Oh, this is a good one. We always like talking about grant applications going in. So this is a technical assistance grant that was authored by Carrie O'Nino on the planning staff. And the idea is to get a design, a sort of a conceptual design for what would it take to complete the greenway. So the Parks for People chapter of the comprehensive plan envisions a greenway along the city stream corridors. This one around Trips Run. So the idea is that something to connect all the green spaces there, the WNOD, Berman Park, Cavalier Trail. Of course, along the way, you hit Oak Street Elementary and you hit the city's two major commercial corridors, Broad Street and Washington Street. So you knit that all together with a greenway. The reason for needing technical assistance is because all the land in between those things is already developed. So the technical assistance grant could lay out, are there portions of this trail that ought to be on the sidewalk? If so, could you look at some sort of expanded sidewalk or widened sidewalk along that space? If there is a spot where it would be helpful to sort of work with private property owners, could that be done by easement? How much of an easement do you need? So thinking about what are the design considerations in terms of routing, facility design, as well as cost. So hopefully that gets approved. We should get that decision in a couple months. But if not, there's always a value in putting together the application package, and that's attached to this report as well. That wraps up my written director's report. And as I mentioned, the only two things coming up on your agenda in the next couple meetings. First is, as I mentioned, the kickoff for the small area plan on the 1st, and then your annual advance on the 15th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Yeah, we look forward to both of those items. And also maybe look forward to a slightly slower pace. It's been a busy few months getting through this fall. So, all right, well, that takes us to item number 8, no work sessions, correspondence. We had 3, those items were all related to the Founders War 2, and we all reviewed those. And so that takes us to the end of the agenda. I appreciate everybody's time and patience tonight, getting through a pretty long agenda. The Founders War 2 project, I think, will continue to evolve, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out at council. But it certainly, benefited from all the feedback we provided. It's a much better project going back to council than it was when it got to us, which is the point of all of this. So I appreciate everyone's time and hard work in reviewing that. So, all right. Well, with that, I wish everybody happy Thanksgiving next week, and hope everyone gets to enjoy a little bit of time off and some good food. And we'll pick back up again. Hard to say, hard to believe it, but pick back up again in December, on December 1st. So, thanks everybody, and we'll call this meeting officially adjourned. Thanks.
All right. Thanks everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thanks,
Thanksgiving, everybody.